This meeting will now come to order. This is the April 23rd, 2013 meeting of the Town of Fairfield Town Plan and Zoning Commission. We're going to go into executive session first. Bills and Communications, meeting minutes of April 9th, 2013. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Commissioner Jacobs has moved to approve. But just for the record, who is on for Commissioner Wagner right now?
Well, we need Sally and Joan for Jim and Matt.
Okay, so Sally and Joan, you're both on for Jim and Matt. Thank you. Commissioner Sutter's moved to...
The main motion, moved and seconded, right?
Yes.
Okay. I have
Any additions, deletions, or corrections, Commissioner Sutter?
Okay. They're basically typos. Under outdoor dining, paragraph 1, last word in line 3 should be approval, V-A-L, rather than approved.
I'm sorry, what was that? The number, what was
Last word in line 3 of
Line three.
paragraph 1 should be approval, A-L. Okay. And on page 2, under Gateway West, I think the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line, I believe it should be phrased Saskell Hill Road to make it perfectly clear what we're talking about.
Okay.
Is that it? Thank you, Commissioner Sutter. Are there any other additions, deletions, or corrections? Commissioner Parker?
On the planning discussion, we didn't mention Melissa Israel presenting for the trees.
Thank you. On behalf of the Forestry Committee? On behalf of the Forestry Committee, she wanted the minutes to note that someone presented to us on behalf of the Forestry Committee.
Wasn't that 2 meetings ago?
What did she present?
She didn't present last meeting. That was 2 meetings ago. And it was Misty Byer.
What?
Misty Byer presented it 2 meetings ago. I don't recall Alyssa presenting last meeting.
Oh, all right. I guess she just spoke with us about
She spoke about something. I can't remember.
She talked about we asked her a question about the caliber of trees.
It was about right, we did ask her a question about it.
Are there any other additions, deletions, or corrections to the minutes? Commissioner Jacobs?
Just for the record, I was not at the April 9th, but I have more than once listened to the tape. So, for the record.
Thank you, Commissioner Jacobs. Hearing nothing further, all in favor of the minutes with those changes signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Minutes are approved unanimously. We have one item on the compliance calendar, 544 Kings Highway Cutoff, application of Russell Capiciello Sr. for 150 square feet of outdoor dining on an existing patio, Trevi Lounge, in a designed commercial district. Mr. Wendt?
Okay, this is an existing restaurant that's been there for some time under various names. It's across the street from Home Depot, and if you go way back, you might remember it as the, no, never mind. There's an existing patio out front, and it's got an existing wrought iron railing around it. They're not proposing any improvements. They're just looking to use 150 square feet of it for outside dining. In pursuant to the letter, they know that they can't have any additional signage. They're none proposed. They're just looking to move a few tables out into about an 18 by 8 area at the end of their existing patio. It does not encroach on the existing sidewalk, which is in front of that. And if you've been by it, there's an existing already wrought iron railing around it.
Thank you. Is there a motion on this item?
Motion to approve.
Commissioner Jacobs has moved to approve. Commissioner Sutter has seconded. Any discussion? Commissioner Jacobs?
I do not see why anyone would want to sit there, but I also see no reason to deny this. I mean, they're between a gas station, 95, and Home Depot, not particularly a place that I would want to eat dinner, but yet they want it, and it seems reasonable to grant it.
Commissioner Sutter?
Yeah, I drove by it on the way over here, and the dining area seems to be well separated from the road and anything else, so I think it's a safe place for the particular use.
Agreed. Any further discussion by any member of the commission? Hearing none, all in favor of 544 Kings Highway Cutoff, application of Russell Capiciello Sr. for 150 square feet of outdoor dining on an existing patio, Trevi Lounge, in a designed commercial district, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions, carries unanimously. At this point, we're going to stand in a brief recess to reconfigure the room for the public hearing on 185 Thorpe Street. So we will stand in for a brief 5-minute recess to reconfigure the room. We're back in session. This is the April 23rd, 2013 meeting of the Town of Fairfield Town Plan and Zoning Commission. This is the public hearing portion of our meeting. We have 3 items on the agenda this evening for public hearing, which we will be treating concurrently. The first is 185 Thorpe Street, zone change application of 185 Thorpe Street Corp. to establish a designed residence district on land presently zoned designed industrial district. This was continued from March 26th and April 2nd. Second, zoning regulation amendment, application of 185 Thorpe Street Corp. to amend sections 10.7.2 and 10.12 of the regulations, continued from March 26th and April 2nd. Third, 185 Thorpe Street, special permit and coastal site plan application of 185 Thorpe Street Corp. pertaining to a 65-unit residential development, continued from March 26th and April 2nd. Tonight, where we are procedurally, this is the 3rd day of our hearing. The applicant still has the floor. They will be summarizing now and I believe presenting a little bit more evidence. We'll have any final questions for the commission. At that point, we go to the members of the public. We give the members of the public an opportunity to comment to the commission if they have any statements they'd like to make to us, the commission. Following the public comment, we go back to the applicant for his conclusion and his final statements in this matter. We will not be voting on this tonight. We'll be voting on this in executive session at a subsequent meeting. Attorney Fitzpatrick. Fallon.
He does that on purpose every
Have
you noticed that?
I was saying Attorney Fitzpatrick is not here. Attorney Fallon will be here, but you interrupted.
We look a lot alike. How can I tell you? I think before I start, the last time we left off, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Commissioner Barrett had a question which he deferred with regard to the amendments, so I will just open with allowing him to make those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fallon. I know you're going to do your summary, and I don't want to interrupt the flow of the summary, so I just want to, my question on the zone changes, hopefully you'll cover it in the summary, and if not, I'll ask the question after you do the summary. But with regard to the zone change and the proposed text amendments, and really the things you're asking from this commission with respect to our regulations, I was hoping you'd cover what the rationale is for the zone change from industrial to design residential. Do you explain the text amendment, because it seemed to have been written to enable this application with its proposed size and scope. So for instance, our current regs for lot coverage in the district is 20%. For elderly and solely affordable, we allow 35%, but you're asking us to make this for the underlying distance 25%. So for more than what our regs are. Same with the floor area, it's 50%. Elderly and affordable is 50%, and you're asking for 55%. So just the rationale for changing it by the underlying district. And then finally, something that I don't think has come out yet, is maybe a minor point, but just, we actually have a reg that there's no more than 4 dwelling units in any single building, 10.9.1. And each one has to have an entrance, direct access to the interior, so you don't have a hallway of apartments, that type of thing. But then in section 10.9.2, it says we may, not have to, adjust the requirements of that for the underlying zone when the underlying zone includes design industrial.
Right.
So again, I just want to know what the rationale is for the commission to adjust the requirements to allow buildings, because some of the buildings we propose are 5 and 6 dwelling units. So I just say, in your summary, if you could just explain these things you're asking the commission for and just explain the rationale.
Would you want me to do that now, or hold off to the summary?
Anytime during your summary, I just want to make sure that...
Whatever works for you.
Whatever works best.
I mean, I think since the questions are raised now, I can certainly briefly respond to them, and that way, hopefully, elaborate if necessary. I covered in my original presentation, I think, the standards for the zone change, and as you remember, I did cite you to sections of the Town Plan of Conservation and Development. One of those is found at, say, at page 42, with regard to the center area, and reference to, in section 11.3.10, creation of a transitional zone for multifamily housing, to stem the spread of business uses into residential neighborhoods. I also cited you at page 43 of the plan. Housing development may be an appropriate alternative in the area between the turnpike and the railroad if and when the existing commercial use is no longer viable. At page 43 again, additional housing opportunities in the center should be encouraged through existing mixed-use provisions in the zoning regulations. Section Roman numeral 3.3, in terms of goals. Housing opportunities for people of all ages, creeds, and races, and incomes and physical disabilities should be encouraged. 2, diversification of housing accommodations for the many individual desires of our population, which I think is very important here. And I also cite utilization of the design residence district as a transitional area from commercial uses to single-family residential uses. So as I pointed out then, I think all of those aspects of the town plan of conservation and development are embodied in this application and are consistent with those expressed aspirations of the town plan of conservation and development, and are going to provide substantial benefit to the community. So I think that to the extent that you do look to your plan of conservation and development relative to assessing the propriety of rezone changes, I think the town plan of conservation and development affords you ample opportunity to find consistency with the plan. With regard to the amendments, there's 3 separate amendments, as you pointed out. One is an amendment to section 10.7.2 that would not impose the requirement for a major or collector road along when the underlying property is design industrial. And as Commissioner, you referenced amendment to section 10.2 that would provide that where the underlying zone is design industrial, the aggregate lot coverage can be up to 25% and the aggregate floor area ratio can be up to 55%. As I address that, I would point out that you have received a letter from the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council. I think everybody has a copy of that. If not, I have copies which I'll just pass down so you don't have to hunt through your files. But they basically, responding to this, as it was referred to them as a text amendment, indicate that the council reviewed the proposed text amendment and does not anticipate a regional impact from the proposed zoning text amendments, as the current zoning regulations allow for exceptions to access, aggregate lot coverage, and total floor area in the DRD, some of which are much greater than the proposed amendments. So what I would say to you, though, in terms of the practical aspects of the question you raised is, like many communities in Connecticut and the Northeast around the country, when you put on your planning hat, which is what you do when you address zone change and text amendments, we are faced with, moving forward in this century, what we're going to do with our industrial property. There are certainly instances, without turning this into a planning lecture, where even in communities like Fairfield, it is good to maintain some industrial land base. There are other times, however, where the passage of time yields properties such as this, properties that have a historic roots in industrial zone and industrial use, but the way the community has evolved, both the residential community and the commercial district, in this case the Post Road, there's a planning challenge to determine what's an appropriate regeneration of that use. When you're looking at property such as property like this property, the regulations, the design, for example, residence district regulations that were written not so much with industrial property in mind, and the costs associated with developing industrial property, whether it be site remediation or other environmental considerations, stormwater management that's never been imposed and whatnot, I think you can at least consider, and let's be honest, you have, as Mr. Devanchik and Mr. Wendt often tell you, you have the ultimate discretion when you act relative to matters pertaining to map amendments or text amendments. But for your consideration, and hopefully to answer your question, I think that these particular amendments, which are focused on when we are seeking to impose the design residence district on property, the underlying zone of which is industrial, are reasonable, and they make good planning sense, because the regeneration of those properties often aren't on a major collector road, often do require a level of coverage or FAR that is greater than might be anticipated if the underlying zone were residential in nature. So that's the argument, or not the argument, but our rationale for it. The last question you raised, if I didn't miss any, was why we would ask you to waive the 4 units to a building. That's very simple, and I think Mr. Horvath spoke eloquently of his design concept. What we're trying to do here and that has two levels. One is to make it attractive, obviously, for our residents, make it feel like a single-family home community. The other thing is to make it consistent with the character of the residential neighborhoods that surround it. And we therefore felt that the design that we came up with here, creating what you saw, and we have those boards here, were such that we would ask you for that waiver because it afforded us a better flexibility and opportunity to deliver an aesthetic product that we think is superior. So those would be my answers.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. You answered my question.
Thank you.
What I'd like to do tonight, and I appreciate
I think
I'm
Attorney Jacobs has a question.
No, that's fine.
Mr. Jacobs, I'm sorry, Commissioner Jacobs.
Attorney Fitzpatrick will be happy to answer.
He may, yes.
I'm sorry I missed the last meeting and wasn't able to ask you then. I'm hoping to be able to ask you some questions now.
Sure.
Having to do with the floodplain and flooding in the area.
Yep, we have our experts here, so I may defer to them, but that would be fine.
I'm assuming that this is a property that will require flood insurance.
Mr. Jobs, I believe that's correct, but I will let Mr. Jobs answer that.
For the record, my name is Walter Jobst. I'm a professional engineer and land surveyor in the state of Connecticut. This property is located within the FEMA 100-year flood zone.
So it will require flood
It
insurance.
will require flood insurance.
And you're aware that FEMA has two different approaches. One is requirements, the stick, and the other is the carrot. Would these people who have this property be looking for a discount on their flood insurance? Are you familiar with the program that FEMA has for discounts on flood insurance? If a town does some things, everyone in the town who has flood insurance will get a discount. You have to jump through some hoops. FEMA, through its wisdom of the carrot, is trying to make the town a safer place in case of flood. One of their things is that they are looking for less development or no development in a floodplain. One of their approaches that will get you credits towards discount is if you rezone everyone in a floodplain 1 acre. Were you aware of that?
I was not, no.
They have another one where they say they would like the town to acquire property in a floodplain so it's not built. They also look for people to move. They also look for town facilities to be moved out of a floodplain.
The only thing, not to interrupt, but I had some photographs. I think two things are important. First of all, before we came to you, we had a full vetting of the permits that we required from the state and the DEP, and I elaborated what those permits were that have all been granted at this point. They're very aware of all the things you're talking about, and in some instances you're correct, but this is not a high-velocity zone. These are photographs, which I'll just pass down, make part of the record. We can get other copies if you want.
There are two distinctions. This is in a statutory flood zone, as defined by FEMA. From a practical standpoint, this property is not, because we have certain structures located downstream which attenuate the flooding and whatnot upstream. We had a study done, which I think was brought up in our presentation. Dr. Borland from University of Connecticut studied for over a month the tide cycles and established the fact that the high tide, the spring high tide in this region was less than it is, say, along Fairfield Beach Road. Because
The pictures that are being handed down are photographs that were taken the morning after Hurricane Irene, which was the larger storm event in terms of rainfall in Sandy. And they're offered for the purposes, and I apologize for interrupting Walter, to show that this is not an area, although in a statutory flood zone, that has historically shown itself to be prone to significant flooding. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So, his study showed that the flooding on this property in this area is less than might be indicated by the statutory FEMA designation.
Actually, what you were just citing in the study was during the summer in a full moon, or a spring with a full
Spring
moon,
high tide,
which has nothing to do with a storm. So a storm with, you have a,
True, but if it's,
The geography
study
of
is, the
Fairfield.
study is done as if you have a spring full moon and you have a storm that occurs at the same time, you get a worst-case scenario. And that's what we were looking at. Or that's what he was looking at.
and to go back to your comment about the state looking at it, I always thought that federal trumped state.
That's a statement that in some instances is true, but in some is not. In this case, there's no federal permits that are required for this project. There are state permits, and they've been granted. And they are granted, and also the state, the DEEP has responsibility, as does the local municipality, for administering FEMA complaints.
In fact, we have to vote on FEMA here,
You do?
and we're usually not given a choice.
Right, and there's nothing contradictory to that, to what we're asking you to do here.
But FEMA also does their carrot. They have their requirements and then their carrots.
They certainly do, and they are particularly aggressive with their carrots, again, when there are actually properties that are located in high-velocity zones where the actual risk of flooding is significant. And this is not one of those properties. It's not in the V zone.
Mr. Wagner?
So is it the point that the town, if we approve this for building in a flood zone, the town would not then be able to apply for discounts on flood insurance? Is that?
Oh, absolutely not.
No, okay.
It's just,
That was just an inference which could have been made from the line of questions. I just didn't know if that was part of the...
no, the discounts are for steps the town takes wherever they can throughout the town.
Okay. All right, very good, thanks.
I mean, one good step here, without digressing, would be, we are imposing on this site of 6.7 acres a storm management program that is totally non-existent now. And that has, I don't know if that qualifies as a FEMA carrot, but it's certainly a positive development in terms of flooding considerations.
Thank you. Mr. Jobst? Mr. Fallon?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do at this point, the public has been very patient. A lot of people want to talk. Just so you know where I'm going with this, I have a couple of what I would call housekeeping items, but they're important, and they're important because they do involve some new information I want to impart to the commission, and I don't want to put the public or the commission in a position where in summation I'm offering new evidence on rebuttal. And then, we'll take our leave and reserve our right for an opportunity to summarize later. What I'd like to do in terms of those housekeeping items in the first instance is I'd like to call on Attorney Miller. And the first night of the hearing, there was a question or questions raised with regard to the survey. And, how did you not have a survey and so on? And I think the way we left it was that we would investigate whether or not there had ever been a survey. And if there had been a survey, how come we didn't see it and when did we see it? And I'd like just Attorney Miller to comment on that because I know numerous commissioners were concerned about that issue.
We asked for a copy of the deed, too. We asked for a copy of the deed. That was, remember?
I seem to recall that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's on the tape still.
We'll do, you're right, Commissioner. We'll see if that's delivered to the staff.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, Barbara Miller from the firm of Brody Wilkinson, and I would like to correct a misstatement that I did make on the record, not having a copy of the survey in our file, and upon extensive inquiry, our client not having a copy of the survey. I did get in touch with Mr. Jobst at the Huntington Company, and in fact, there was a survey done in 1994. I'm assuming it was for zoning purposes because there was a certificate of zoning compliance issued at the time. That doesn't change the fact that neither Mr. McClinch or Mr. Pearson ever saw the survey, so they were still unaware of the disparity with the town property and the location of the fence. I do have a copy of that survey, if anyone would care to see it.
Is that going to be submitted for the record?
No, it does not.
Can I ask one question of Attorney Miller? And it's self-evident, so I guess I'll just say it. The survey that she referred to, that we've discovered, that was apparently, as best we can surmise, used for zoning compliance purposes, does not show the fence. Why that is, I don't know, but anyone looking at this survey, and I'll pass it down and it can end up with the clerk, would not be aware of the encroachment based upon the fence, why the fence wasn't shown.
Well, the reason the fence wasn't shown is because the survey went to the southern boundary, and the fence is beyond the boundary, so that would
So,
make good
yeah,
sense.
the legal meets and bounds of the property were surveyed, and they didn't go beyond the legal meets and bounds. The fence being beyond that, it doesn't show on the survey.
That's absolutely right, thank
So
you.
who commissioned the survey?
I don't know. It may have been my former partner, Mr. Ober, who's now retired.
Well, he did it on behalf of a client.
Absolutely.
So who was the client? And so what entity commissioned the survey?
Same as the applicant.
Right.
We assume that it was commissioned by Mr. Ober because he was in the process of getting a zoning compliance for the use. But we just want to clarify so the record was clear. There was a survey, although the survey was not noted by Mr. The clincher. Mr.
94 was still Fairfield Lumber in operation, correct?
No.
No?
No, this was after the
was after.
bankruptcy bidding was accomplished and the bidding was completed. And the bid for this property by 185 Thorpe Street had been accepted with, I think, a $100,000 deposit, non-refundable.
Thank you.
Okay,
With
thanks.
all due respect, Attorney Fallon, you realize that the survey shows that the property line is 10 feet from the frame shed. I mean, the fence is probably 60, 70 feet.
Yeah, I agree. The issue isn't that one could not have looked at that survey and become cognizant of a possible encroachment issue with the fence. The point is that that survey was not seen by the client, and we can only surmise that that was because Mr. Ober got it just to get a zoning compliance, and that's basically where we found it. But to the extent that we said there was no survey, we wanted to correct that record because there was a survey. But the testimony or statement that the clients were not aware of it and that the purchase was not subject to a surveyed situation is true.
Right, right. I mean, the client owns the attorney's files, though.
Right,
I mean,
but they didn't, they
I
didn't.
mean, the personal knowledge of the individuals,
Right.
I accept the statement that that's what they testified to, but, you know, the applicant here is a corporate entity, and a legal entity. The legal entity had a lawyer. The lawyer commissioned a survey, and it was in the files of the surveyor. So
That's all true.
Understood.
Thank you.
Just a few other matters. I think these things are already part of your record, but I want to make sure because they have been introduced. There were questions by members of the commission with regard to the biofiltration system and what provisions were going to be made or would be made for inspection and maintenance of that system to ensure that it functioned as it was designed. You should have, I think, for your file, and I want to just check that, Mr. Jontos, who obviously testified with regard to the biofiltration inspection and maintenance program, wrote a letter on April 1, 2013, and you should all have that, because that was done by Mr. Jontos, who cannot be here tonight, but to address specifically that question. The other thing that
is in our file. for the
Right.
record.
The other thing that should, I believe, is part of your file is Mr. Reber focused a number of questions relative to various aspects of the design, and Mr. Jontos submitted a letter to the record dated April 12th, 2013. Do you have that letter? If not, we'll make it part of the file.
We don't appear to have that letter.
I apologize if that didn't get in, but I have it with me tonight, and what I will do is I'll give it to Mr. Wendt, and we'll see that the commission has copies made. We'll also see that Mr. Reber, who I think is here tonight, gets a set of copies since it's directly in response to his questions, okay? But I want that to be in the record before. And could I have just a courtesy, before I give it to Mr. Wendt, directly related to questions raised by Mr. Reber, could I just let him look at it?
Sure. Thank you.
I have comments on Mr. Stanky's letter, but I think I'll hold those off to my summary because, you know, obviously I think we've responded to questions or concerns he raised, but I'll wait on those things right now. I'd like Walter Jobst to come forward, though, because there obviously has been a lot of action and activity on our part with the town engineering department. We've been meeting with them for many, many months, and one of the matters of discussion with the engineering department has been the existing state of the town sanitary sewer line that runs through the property. Now, I should make it clear, this is an existing sanitary sewer line which currently serves residents in the neighborhood, and it runs through our property. And you've read various reports and input from Ms. Pooley and her department, and there were and are concerns about that sewer because of the sewer pipe, the sanitary sewer line. Because of its condition, it's very old. You should have 2 documents as part of your record, and if you don't, or even if you do, I made some copies, so I'll just pass them down. The first is an email to Mr. Wendt from Laura Pooley. It's dated March 26, 2013. It addresses the status of the department's review relative to the site issue as it relates to 2 matters. One is the sewer.
We already have this in the record.
You do?
Yeah.
I'll just make sure copies are
That's fine.
One is the sewer, and the other is a program for geotechnical inspection and monitoring over the first years after construction. These were the product of meetings that we had in which Ulrich Lafosse, who is our geotechnical expert, was involved and offered suggestions which the engineering department then reviewed with its own consultant with regard to the matter, and found that to be appropriate. The other memo, which is of yesterday, that is in your record, is from Laura Pooley, and it confirms, again, further commitments and discussions between the applicant and the engineering department with regard to these 2 issues, those being a program of geotechnical monitoring as well as a matter of replacement of the sewer. What we've agreed to with the town through the engineering department, and that should certainly be a condition of your approval, is the following: that the applicant, Thorpe Street, will at its own cost assume the replacement of the existing town sanitary sewer line, and that's what Ms. Pooley's email of yesterday speaks to. I'm going to ask Walter just briefly to highlight, we'll make this part of your record as well. We're not looking for any stars here, and you do not buy approvals in this town, either officially or unofficially. But in that spirit, I would want to tell you that this we approximate to be an $80,000 undertaking by the developer, and Ms. Pooley's email speaks more credibly and eloquently than I do. It's an important byproduct of a sort of, it's not an off-site improvement, but it's certainly a non-related improvement that really will have substantial benefit, not only for our site, but for the entire surrounding neighborhood, because there's been historically very big concerns relative to the integrity of this sanitary sewer line. The other thing I'm going to ask Walter to cover in that context is we've also agreed, as part of this overall commitment with the town, to provide certain easements, permanent easements, to the town property. And as long as you're up here, you might as well address that. That goes back, you remember Commissioner Kennelly's comments, which I thought were pretty good. Like, you know, if you do this now and we don't take care of the town property, which I'm also going to address in a minute, how are we going to get there? So I'd like Walter just briefly to review with you this plan, which covers the installation of the new sanitary sewer line, and then to switch gears a little bit and talk about the commitments which should also be made conditions of approval of the easements that we would provide to the town.
Again, for the record, Walter Jobst. This is a blow-up. This shaded area is the
John.
butterfly area in the center of the site. Thorpe Street's up here. The entrance drive comes and continues to the west. The existing sanitary sewer comes in off of Thorpe Street to a manhole here, traverses our site to a manhole at the intersection of Francis and Bungalow. The main trunk line comes in from the west to that intersection. It then turns and goes into our site, and then across our site and eventually through the Salt Marsh and to Ruane Street. Now, our proposal is to abandon this section from the interior of our site to Bungalow, replace that with a new 10-inch line through our site, which will take the flows from Thorpe Street to the trunk line, also service those units that parallel that run, and then replace the trunk line from the uphill side of our bioswale, run it parallel with the existing trunk line, and connect into the existing trunk line in Francis Street, and then abandon the old 21-inch line, which will have been replaced by a new 21-inch line. We had numerous discussions with the engineering department, the sewer department's consultant. They've reviewed this and are excited that we are offering to do this. Now, to accomplish that and a few other things, we will be granting some new easements. Currently, there's a 10-foot sanitary sewer easement for that 21-inch trunk line that runs more or less parallel with this gray line. We will be dedicating a new 20-foot easement over our new pipe to the town so that they, if in the future need to, can have access to that pipe. As had been stated before, we will have a 15-foot access easement that we had discussed with the town engineering department to give them access to the head wall and the 48-inch pipe coming from the north and feeding this drainage ditch. So that will provide access for the town to get in there, clean the ditch, clean the head wall, clean the pipe. And we will also be providing a 15-foot access easement at the southwest corner from Beaumont Street, accessing it from the town property across our property to the town property located to the south of us. So that'll give the town two access points to the Salt Marsh, one at the southwest, one at the northeast, and a sanitary sewer easement which more or less bisects our site.
Mr. Jobst, does the granting of the easements, as you've expressed, affect any of the other drawings, whether building layout, design, landscaping, nothing like that?
We'll leave these with you, and we apologize if we can have more copies made, but we just finalized this over the last week.
I just want to make sure there's no conflict. None of your other drawings have to change because of that.
No, I was able to make the easements work around everything else.
Okay.
So this does not affect anything that we had initially proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Jobst. So we will leave these plans, because they are really new and they should be part of your submission, but we wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that we were taking this undertaking with regard to the replacement of the sewer line and the easements that Mr. Jobst talked
And
about.
Mr. Fallon, since these are easements, we're going to, if we approve this, this is going to be an important condition of the approval. Could you just read into the record the drawing number so we can have that, so we can reference it as part of the conditions for approval?
Just to take the 2 pages, that one shows the one that shows the easement, the title block, and then the one that talks about the other.
Well, we will end up filing this easement map, which is titled Easement Map, Osprey Landing, prepared for 185 Thorpe Street Corp., number 185 Thorpe Street, Fairfield, Connecticut. dated April 22nd, April 22nd, 2013. The other drawing is part of the overall site plan package. That is trunk line construction plan, Osprey Landing, prepared for 185 Thorpe Street Corp., number 185 Thorpe Street, Fairfield, Connecticut. The original date is November 4th, 2008, and the latest revision, which is number 20, is 4/22/13, which shows the further extension of the replacement of the 21-inch trunk line.
Thank you, Mr. Jobson. While you're there, Commissioner Wagner has a question of one or both of you.
Thanks. I don't know who it's appropriate for, but they, if I'm understanding you and Ms. Pooley's email correctly, that we should make this a condition of approval, if we approve, that there be a maintenance program in place for at least 5 years, and that there should be a bonding requirement, and she mentions in her email.
Which he will give you input on, and, you know, that's...
Yeah, that I guess was my question, was whether you would be providing us with some information about what an appropriate bond might be, or should we be looking to others to...
The discussions we've had...
That's usually, the bonding issues are usually generated by the engineering department.
We'll accept whatever the recommendation of the engineering department is, we accept.
Okay.
They've had significant conversations, not only with our consultant, Mr. LaPlace, but also their own consultant, so I think they have a pretty good idea of how they want to handle the bond. The only thing, and it's certainly within your purview, the only thing I want to point out is in Ms. Pooley's memo of yesterday, she does reference a 2 to 3 year monitoring program. I mean, you can discuss that with her at a staff level, but, you know, I think she perceives that...
Where do you see...
The second paragraph in her email of April 22nd, she talks about a 2 to 3 year monitoring program.
Because in the documents that we had before us previously, as well as in her March 26th email that you just handed me, says that the program should be for 5 years.
Yeah, I think, I will, go ahead.
That was before we had extended the offer of, initially our replacement of the trunk line was from Francis Street to this point here. And in further discussions with engineering, we said we will extend it another 100 whatever feet to just shy of our bioswale. And because we're doing that, she has shortened the period of monitoring, because basically this will be all new pipe, and we don't have to and the existing trunk line will be abandoned. So there's no need to monitor that long-term because it won't be in operation.
I see. So the modification resulted in less
Shortening the
old
monitoring
pipe,
period.
and that reduced the monitoring period.
But at the end of the day, you know, whether we close this hearing tonight or not, you certainly legally can seek her further opinion as a member of the staff, the town engineering department. And, you know, we're going to abide by her and the department's recommendations with regard to both the amount of the bonding and the period of monitoring.
Right. Well, that's what we needed, was a representation to that effect. I just didn't know if that needed to be something that was done with you prior to our, you know...
No. We rely on the, you know, the good faith of the commission, of the engineering department, and we think they have a pretty good handle on it. The last thing I want to discuss and make part of the record before we go to public comment is the matter of regarding the town-owned property, the encroachment and its environmental condition. We've listened very carefully to the concerns expressed by the commission regarding the urban fill, which was placed onto the town property south of our parcel, as best we can all figure, sometime in the early 60s. Subsequently, as I think the record now indicates, this fill was paved over and a fence placed on the perimeter of the paving. And I don't think anyone disputes, based upon what we've heard, that the applicant had nothing to do with the placement of the fill, the pavement, or the fencing. Clearly, the issue of the survey arose in terms of, well, should you have known about it, but I don't think anybody's indicated that from the time we bought the property, we filled it, paved it, or put the fence up. Although the applicant has, as part of this record, and will continue to deny any legal liability for remediating the urban fill, which was placed on the town property at some historic point in time, the applicant would very much like to work constructively with this commission with the town of Fairfield, to be a good corporate citizen and a neighbor, and to work with the town to improve the conditions on the town property adjacent to our property. With this objective in mind, and since the dialogue we engaged at the time this matter was first open for public hearing, we've consulted with our team of engineering experts who've been assisting us on this project for many years. The result of these discussions is a recommendation to the town that we're making here, and this is written down, so you'll get a copy of it, for a conceptual remediation plan for the town to undertake with the objective of best protecting the environment and public safety. Removing all of the urban fill from the marsh while properly containing erosion and washout during excavation, we're told by our professionals, is not feasible or is it advisable, nor is it possible to stabilize the bank from which the urban fill would be cut. Removing the asphalt, however, and 1 foot of fill, and then placing a geofabric cap topped with clean soil and plantings is the approach recommended by our consultants. This also conforms, I believe, to the Conservation Commission's staff recommendation in 2009 in its concept review, I think it was comment number 9, to increase upland habitat adjacent to the marsh. The process for the town to accomplish this type of remediation would be as follows. Remove and dispose of asphalt and fencing. Evacuate approximately 1 foot of soil, with the exception of one small area, which may require some minor fill using proper erosion controls. Disposal or legally permissible reuse of excavated soil, which is over the residential remediation standards. Then place a geofabric and geogrid on the cleared portion as to cap, delineation, and stabilization layer, and top with clean fill and loam. Hydroseed the area with salt-tolerant grass species to be covered with sterile straw and maintained by mowing and periodic removal of invasive plants. Because it is town property and the legal requirements being what they are, the applicant does not propose to undertake this work. However, it will provide cooperation and financial assistance if it receives the approvals requested as a condition of approval. The applicant will make available all relevant data which it has regarding the town open space property. That test boring data and material has been previously submitted to the Conservation Department. In addition, the engineering consultants that we've used on this project over the last many years have agreed to work for the town in order to assist the town in obtaining any needed approvals and provide engineering support. In addition, based upon the estimated construction costs to do what we've just described, that range between $200,000 and $250,000, according to our consultants, the applicant is willing, as a condition of approval, which I will summarize, to provide financial assistance to the town in the amount of $200,000 to be earmarked for purposes of this remediation of the urban fill on town property. In order for the town to perform this remediation, the applicant is going to allow, obviously, reasonable access to the town property while the remediation is in progress, and will also provide the permanent access by way of the easement from Beaumont Street that Mr. Jobst just described. So in the spirit of this type of constructive compromise, which I think is a win-win situation for everybody, with regard to the town property, and without conceding liability for this remediation, the applicant proposes in summary the following conditions of approval with respect to the town open space property. 1, the applicant will provide the town of Fairfield with all technical information which it has in its possession regarding the town property. 2, the applicant agrees to have the town of Fairfield retain its engineering consultants to provide any permitted or engineering advice which the town requires to perform the remediation. 3, the applicant will provide the town reasonable access to its property via Thorpe Street during its remediation and construction process, as so long as the town does not interfere with or interrupt the ongoing activities on our site. And this, of course, would be in addition to the permanent easement that's already been discussed. 4, the applicant will provide the town a permanent easement to access the town open space property for maintenance purposes as indicated on the easement map provided by the Huntington Company as part of this record. And number 5, the applicant will place the sum of $200,000 in an escrow account satisfactory to the town to be drawn upon by the town to cover the costs of any engineering and construction disbursements or costs for the remediation of the town property as above described. We would hope that in your consideration of this overall application, you will perceive our suggestion as a reasonable and constructive one. The last thing that we want, because we do believe so strongly that this is a good development for the town, that it does provide a housing option for a lot of people in town who are looking for this type of housing. It does provide an appropriate transition to be one of our primary commercial areas and a fine residential neighborhood. The last thing that we would want would be this application to lose its focus for all of us because of concerns or dispute involving historical encroachments or the remedial condition of the town property. So we've sought over the last few weeks, as we considered all this, to try to address that in a positive, meaningful way, so that the focus of the commission can be, I think, where they want it to be and where it should be. And that is on this proposed development from a planning and zoning context in terms of all the matters that pertain to transitional uses and providing housing options for the diverse population that we have. So, subject to addressing any questions that the commission might have, members of the public might have, and reserving an opportunity for what hopefully will be a brief summary, we appreciate your patience, we appreciate your input. Obviously, we took that input very seriously, and I hope that's reflected in some of the comments and material that we submitted tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fallon. This time we'll go to public comment. I'll have members of the public who would like to speak come up one at a time to approach the podium once we begin, just giving your names and addresses and addressing the commission. I know we have some RTM members, some elected officials, and at least one department head here, so as a courtesy, if any of our elected officials or department heads would like to speak, you're welcome to go first. I know you've been here for the whole time, so I just open the floor to any of our elected officials or department heads. Mr. Stanky? You're nodding, no one else is moving, so. Apparently there are some here, but no one who wants to speak ahead of you. You can put them on the table here if you want, if it's easier. Is that easier to, so you don't drop? Whatever works.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Tom Snackey, Conservation Director, representing the Fairfield Conservation Commission in a matter that some importance to it. I think probably been over 20 to 30 years since it's been before this commission on such a matter of importance, and this one is holding the commission's attention since 2009. It has voted twice to engage the town attorney in reviewing the encroachment matter, and voted to oppose the application in its present form, and my reason for being here this evening. The little background, I started here in October 1971, and within a year, Mr. Benjamin Plotkin had invited me down with the first selectman, the public works director, town engineer, and he was quite upset about being flooded out through his yard and fabrication areas due to lack of drainage from the incoming water from the watershed getting out into Long Island Sound. This was primarily because he had been, one of the reasons, had been flooded in the 50s. Town erected a dike down by Salt Meadow Road, where it is today, which eliminated the tidal flooding, but also eliminated the tidal scouring that kept all the drainage channels clear of sediment, which would carry out the upland runoff water into the Pine Creek and into Long Island Sound. It also eliminated, in eliminating the tide, it also eliminated all salt saturation of the marsh soils, which increased the growth of Phragmites, which dried out, burned, and removed his lumber company in a large fire event. The lack of drainage increased the mosquito breeding by creating a laminar flow over the dike marshes, so that you could have tremendous amount of insects breeding in the very shallow pools out on the marsh, and the fish, the predators, could not get through the Phragmites growth to eat them. All of these concerns were expressed by Mr. Plotkin. We were down there, I'd say, about every 2 years with the same issues. His property was subsiding, the fires were constant, the flooding seemed to be increasing from his point of view. Mosquitoes would not allow the workers to be out in the yards early morning or evening. And we indicated to him that we were trying to restore the marshes, get the tide back, flush the channels, get the predators in, the fish in to eat the mosquitoes, pupal and larval forms, and have done so quite successfully. During those visits, Mr. Plotkin indicated his history of the site, how he started, filled in the marshes, moved out across the peat, gaining the ground that he needed. When we were walking through the property, we point out to him that his property was probably, the yard surface was down maybe 8 to 10 inches below the lip of the driveway entrance into his buildings. The buildings had been apparently on piles or sound foundation, but the yard was going down into the mud, and the deeper it went, the more frequent and the deeper the flooding that he had encountered. The property went up, I think, in '92. The 185 Thorpe Street Corporation acquired it in March of '94. In that October, Mr. McClinch requested former First Selectman Sullivan to coordinate a meeting with the town to provide some relief for his flooding, fires, mosquitoes. We met for about 2 hours. I think it was October 7th. My notes go back because of a daily log that I've kept for 40 years. And we reviewed the entire history that had been conveyed to me from Mr. Plotkin, my observations, those of Frank Daniels, John Sullivan, Jackie Durrell, and Mr. Audley at that time. We reviewed all the issues and left with it. I believe he had an understanding of what he was dealing with. When the corporation acquired the property, that was in March of '94, it went on to, in 1994, it leased to the McClinch Equipment Corporation, and later on it conveyed property to the Objiskis on Beaumont Street. Oh, yeah. And what we have is a map. When the corporation acquired the property, it did so in citing the 1948 Plotkin map, but when it went on to lease the property to McClinch Equipment and to convey in June to the Objiskis, it cited The January 1994 map, the one composed by the Huntington Company. When you look at it, I think it was noted earlier that north is at the top of the page. The bottom is this one shed is 10.2 feet from the town property line. The Visky property, it's up here in this corner, this triangular area. And this is the deed to that property. This went out in May 16th, 1994. It's signed by Mr. McClinch, witnessed by Mr. Ober and Mr. Pearson, and it relates to the quitclaim parcel in the upper left corner. When the assignment of leases and rents was imposed, it referenced the schedules, and it accepted, or exempted, if you will, the Obajitsky piece, and that contains 16.02 square feet. That suggests that when you have this map deed and the assignment of lease, this is endorsed by Mr. McClinch, March 7th, 1994, on the lease. Suggests, when you look at it, that the applicant was aware of the property bounds and who was located where. That map on January 20th was filed in the town clerk's office, number 6220, on December 7th, 1994. When you look at what the leasee or lessees did, starting in 1994 up to 2010, it's very difficult to imagine what the crane operation, the lifts, the platforms, all the different things that were down there. But in November 2009, I had occasion to visit the site, and United Rentals put a safety harness on me and put me up with a camera, taking photos of the yard area. This is, I'll pass these around. What you're seeing is the camera, if you will, is looking west toward Rugby, south on the left, the lumber company buildings on the right, and the town property in the center. And this is the area where you find the property in question. And you're looking at, there's a caption on each that will give you an idea. The ground, midpoint, at the being limited lift, where the fueling station was located, where the workers were servicing equipment, out in the yard where the units were stored. What a general layout of the property as that was under the United Rentals occupation
Mr.
at
Stank,
that
could
time.
you just pivot the mic a little towards you if you're going to step away from it, just so we have a clear record for the folks
Yes,
at home?
I'm sorry.
When were these pictures taken?
November 2009.
Thank you.
I could go back.
You can stand off to the side, just
my
pivot the
log
mic, that's
to
fine.
the date, but I think it may have been the 7th. The last shot is looking at from the ground from Old Field Bridge up at the Pine Creek Bridge, and what the cranes look like as they're lined up along the town property at the fence. When you look at that, you get some idea of large and small, different sizes, what they were doing, the activities going on. So this set of photographs takes you back, this is 2010, and I went to the sites, this is the DEP and the UMass Magic sites, and the town aerial photos. There's a series that run back to 2010 to, back to when the applicant had the property. Our earliest one is April 1995. What you'll see is 2010, site's been evacuated, clear, no equipment, no cranes, nothing. But in each, as you look back, in each view, you'll see all the cranes lined up on the town property. All these little, well, some of them are pixelated, but you can see with quite a remarkable amount of detail where this is 2005, where depending on who was, moving the equipment around or what was going out to customers, that the entire area, town property, was in use for storage. When I was there, they took a man off one of the units out on the site. It was on town property. It must have been an operator because he put us up in the lift. And you have, this is the earliest one. This is 1995. You can see a lot of small cranes, scissor lifts, platform lifts, and some very large cranes, really, really long units down here, flatbed trailers, box trailers, all.
Photographs, these aren't taken from a lift, the ones you just handed, are they?
No, those are from the aerial photos.
This is the state flyovers that are done
This is,
periodically?
no, the town has flown, I've used.
You've had these specifically flown by the town?
No, these were flown by various agencies, and there's on file in the
These are the ones
in
on
the
file
town.
up in okay.
But all the ones you see here are coming from the UMass Magic site or the town's 95 town plan, First Selectmen's had the flight in 1995 for town purposes, and that's the 95 unit.
Thank you.
So when you see the topo map and the site drains from the applicant's property and service yard onto the town property, anything that leaks, drips, washes, overflows, what have you, ends up on the ground, on the town property, from dozens and dozens of vehicles for 15 years of occupation on the town land. The concept review, this goes back to the work done on the town property without its knowledge or consent. I was, I think, quoted in the concept review that I wrote for the town. That goes to the developer. The concept review, it's free. It's fairly thorough. Addressed all the issues that have been raised in the letter of March 25th to this board, as well as substantially the issues raised with Mr. Plotkin and Mr. McClinch in my visits with them. But it also is optional. The developer does not have to do anything with it. And there's no authority that goes with it. There's no ability for me to convey to the developer to go on the property, St. Thomas Roman Catholic Church, or the town property, without their permission. This is a recommendation. My recommendation is to obtain additional information in your proposal. And you have to go, if you do have to go on these properties to do so, and I recommend that they did, that you get permission to do it. And I included, I think it's on page 4, the recommendation that they get an insurance policy, hold harmless, for the town in St. Thomas when they go, if and when they go on that land. The biofiltration swell runs from the southerly run roughly 500 feet across the boundary with the applicants in the town property. And this is elevation 4 proposed. It's the invert of the filtration swell. The area up here is 5.5, 6.5 feet where they're going to be cut. They're going to excavate that down to the invert of 4, and then go 2 feet below that to replace the fill. They're going to cut through the fill into the groundwater and into the underlying peat. And they're going to backfill with sand, compost, and topsoil. When you do that and you remove upwards of 4.5 feet of fill, my experience, I've seen filling for dikes on marshes, marina, upland development, probably a dozen different areas in the first 10, 15 years of my work here. Almost all of it was subsequently removed. It was put out on state title wetland, and it was done without a permit. And we had to go down to the landfill, the dump, and recover, remove fill over marsh. Same thing at the marina, several times. And as you put fill on the marsh peat, you can stand there and watch it side cast, tumble into the marsh, and it builds up this mass, compresses, starts to go down, and you'll have around a perimeter slight depression. It's going to hold water and starts breeding mosquitoes pretty quickly. Over time, as the mound or the mass of the material settles down, there's a mud wave that comes out. That was mentioned in my comments and the applicants. And eventually, you'll get to an equilibrium point where the resistance, the forces coming down are balanced by the marsh surface beneath and around the area. So when you go in and you remove this material, what you're doing is you're cutting down between two masses of fill. And if there's any, let's call it any squeezability left in the underlying muck or peat, when you take out this 4 feet of material, you're going to be relieving the pressure that has been holding it in place, if you will. And I would expect to have some differential settlement as it's going down. You haven't changed the town side or the applicant side of this cut. You've just removed the weight from this area going down 2 feet below the invert of the swell. And I would expect that if there's any life left in any resistance, any springability, whatever you want to call it, still in that compressed material, you're going to see it come up in the middle. And this isn't going to come up, in my opinion, in any uniform manner. This differential uplift is very similar, just the opposite, I guess, of the differential settlement subsidence that's been going on. And over a perfectly level run, when you get into these discharges coming in from the road, the swales that are bringing in sediment, when you have just a slight undulation out here, you're going to encounter impeded drainage, accumulation of water, and prepare for conditions of mosquito breeding habitat that will, that in my opinion, will occur under those conditions. And when, in the March 25th letter to the Commission, there was no indication in the application that I could see where the geotech people had evaluated or commented on that undercutting, that over excavation 2 feet below the invert into groundwater and into the underlying peat. That should be addressed by the applicant. And this is the May 1st Conservation Department concept review by staff. So I think, I heard it first tonight, that the conversation has begun, and I think it could be very productive, and would look forward to seeing it continue if that should happen. Are there any questions?
I just want, just Mr. Stenke, I mean, thank you for appearing before us. It's not often we get a town employee to speak on an application, except that the applicant happens to be the town and it's a public works situation. So, again, I don't have your letter with me tonight, but March 25th, but I just say your main concern with this application is the remediation of the town property, that's done in conjunction with the remediation of the applicant's property?
That would be a desirable outcome, yes.
Okay. I mean, I remember from your letter, you said that was the reason for your writing and why you've submitted this to us.
That is driving most of this exercise,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Do you have any comments about the remediation plan on the applicant's property that they've submitted? Or- No?
No.
No, okay.
No?
Mr. Stenke, a question, you go back to your phrase, squeezability. That's a good word, I like that word. I haven't heard that before, but it's a good summary. Is your concern that, the rebound of the soils or the ground, or is it a concern of contaminants also coming up again, because of that
Well,
phenomena?
the contaminants themselves may be locked in, sequestered usually in the fill material, in the solid matter. As you expose these, yes. Right now they're under pavement, and if these are exposed, I think then you can anticipate that they're obviously of a concern. I'm not speaking to the mobility of the constituents, to the actual chemicals. I'm looking at when we remove fill from the marsh, say in Pine Creek down by Daniels Pond, you'll see that when that's you restore the surface, and you will find that the adjacent fill that was outside of the wetland limit line, but still on marsh peat, continues to subside, and where you restored the surface, you see this uplift adjacent to it. And that's occurring where there's, as I said, if there's any squeezability left, if it's compacted to a solid mass, nothing left to give back, fine, it's an equilibrium, it's stable. But if it hasn't reached equilibrium and it's still settling, you remove this material and you can just watch it come up. And I didn't see any borings indicating, I think the analysis, this butterfly area is where they had the 9.5 inches of anticipated subsidence. And if you look at the colors, you'll see where they go, the red was the greatest amount of compression, and it goes going out to the blue and in increments. As you expand from the center along the center, that butterfly near the sewer line, it goes to darker colors, going from the red to the yellow to the green to the blue. And you'll find down in this area is just about the limit where you're looking at a couple of inches of activity with or without surcharging. And that's all it takes, in my view, for you to create some problems. And if with long-term maintenance and constant inspection, you can constantly go back and put a Band-Aid on it. You can regrade it and continue to try to maintain drainage. To me, my experience is that if you're going to have an area like this, you either, if it's isolated from the marsh, you go down 4 feet so that you can hold fish, mosquito predators, with enough depth so that they can live year-round in that water and not be killed off by a lack of oxygen in the winter due to snow cover or ice, and in the summer when it heats up and you diminish the ability of water to hold dissolved oxygen. At the same time, you're increasing the metabolic rate of the fish and organisms that need it more, and that stress can kill them off. So if you haven't got the depth and you can't do it here to go down 4 feet, below your groundwater surface, which is around 3.5, then you should open, in my opinion, you would then consider opening the area so that when the tide comes in, it'll carry fish with it back through these potentially breeding areas so that the fish can get in, that the predator can get into these and naturally control the breeding of mosquitoes. If you don't do that, this will be maintained and look spiffy, right up until the bond is released and for a couple of years thereafter. And then you're going to find that it's going to be a lot easier for these residents to come out on the back deck and take some tossets, some BTI, something, waste oil, whatever. They're insecticides, things that kill insects, mosquitoes. And then this is going to be flushed, and you're just spreading. You'll end up over-treating the area. You'll end up creating more problems with controlling these things than if they had been anticipated and designed for from the beginning.
So it's mainly a mosquito breeding situation that you think is going to be created by the design of this right now. And it's your recommendation not to eliminate it, but to either go deeper, as you've indicated, or to drain it, or opened up.
Right.
Okay. And that would be preferred rather than elimination of the entire swale, if you will, and
Yeah, you're trying to have, it's a buffer area between, behind the residences. It's a walk. It's a very functional thing for improving water quality. It's desirable aesthetically and in terms of connecting the open space and the park to the property and Thorpe Street. It almost seems that, well, I don't want to speculate, but.
So it's your recommendation, if this application is approved and that area is to remain, that it effectively get dug out deeper on the marsh side to allow the the natural predators to be able to survive there.
No, I'm not recommending that, because if you start going down 4 feet below the surface of groundwater, you may, you'll notice in the geotech report, it's a very sensitive area, and the engineer doesn't want you messing with it. And if you start, you're already going down to, from 6.5 at this location down to 4, and then 2 feet below that, that's 4.5 feet. That just gets you down into 2 feet below the surface. You got to go to another 2 feet to get that 4 in groundwater. And I don't, you know, with all the uncertainty and the problems associated with the unstable soils, the slopes, everything else that's in there, and subsidence as well, it's probably something you want to avoid. And maybe you can look at it and say, you know, the best thing we can do is fill it, drain it, and have it go, you know, in a broad crested weir, if you will, all the way along the surface, out into the marsh, you know, and almost in laminar flow to get it into the marsh, and have it perched so that you, I mean, have it designed so that you don't perch any water up here that's going to be, you know, back flooding the road, the street, or you know, through the culverts.
Thank you. Commissioner Wagner?
Thanks. You had mentioned that you had a meeting with the applicant and the first selectman in 1994?
Former First Selectman Sullivan, John
Correct.
Sullivan had left office at that time. Yes, that's
Right.
correct.
I think you said that was in about October?
I believe it was, yes, 94.
Do you remember at that meeting if you reviewed the survey that has been passed around here with the applicant at that time?
We did not.
No.
I do not recall. It was usually the owner of the lumber yard, the property had been flooded out, was upset, and thought the town had some contribution to the problem and the solution. And it was kind of, who are you? What can you tell me about this? You know, what are we dealing with here? There was no map, property survey, or anything like that.
I see. Have you taken a look at the recommendation that's been made by the applicant for their condition of approval and their remediation of the town space?
I read that last week, at the last session. Yeah. I couldn't cite from it, but...
This,
I think Commissioner Wagner is referring to something that was handed out tonight.
this is Attorney Fallon, in his closing remarks of his presentation, essentially offered a condition of approval with regard to the town open space that the applicant would agree to.
Oh, the 5 steps.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. The removal of the asphalt and the fencing, excavation of 1 foot of soil, and so forth. Have you had a chance to see that at all?
No.
What we should do is, what I would recommend is, when Mr. Stanky is done with any questions, I'll allow him to take a look at a copy of this,
Okay.
and let him come back up if he wishes to comment, since...
I would be very interested to understand what your interpretation and view of the offer that has been made here by the applicant with regard to the remediation of the town land.
Well, my impression as I heard it,
Well, before you, it might
Yeah,
make more
before you
sense, why don't you
comment.
read, it's a 2-page document.
oh,
We'll give
I
you an
thought you wanted a
opportunity.
response.
No, but what I'm
We're gonna
suggesting
give you
is,
a
we're going to
chance.
give you a copy to
Oh,
read
thank
what
you.
they handed us, and then I'll let you come back, I'll give you the opportunity to come back, once you've digested it, to answer that question.
Have
To
you
give-
got
to be
extra
fair to
copies?
everyone, if you have any work. And you're handing him what's entitled Statement Regarding Town Open Space, correct? Yeah. And then we'll just go on to other members of the public who may wish to comment, Mr. Stanky, and then we'll have you back this evening. Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to comment? And again, if you could just give us your names and your address, please, for the record, and speak into the microphone.
Ellen Jacob, RTM District 9. There are 2 other district representatives for this area here tonight, Carol Pontrelli and Joseph Fellner. Mr. Fellner, Representative Fellner, is also property owner in this area. and he has signed a protest petition. You'll hear more about it. I'm just going to make a couple of comments. I was here at the last hearing that you had with Attorney Fallon presenting some facts that seem to keep changing. One thing I do feel very strongly about, I'd like to express quickly. We've really gotten to know the neighborhood a little better over the last couple of weeks. We have been going door to door, asking residents how they felt about the proposed change in zoning and the possible implications, and how they felt about their neighborhoods. And it's a wonderful neighborhood. I feel like I was reminded about what Fairfield has meant to me and to the people moving here. People walking dogs, taking evening strolls, children playing in the streets. It's almost a throwback to years ago. And I think that one of the things that maybe isn't measurable, but is an underlying concern for all of us who live here, who have a stake in this town, and who love this town, is who should be in control of its future, of its character, of its safety, and who should be the guardians protecting all of that. Should it be developers who essentially have self-interest at heart, or should it be the people who live in the neighborhoods and the official planners of the town who have the best interests of our town in heart? I think this is happening in little places, big and small, all around our town. I think that we need to be protective and to perhaps not look at it simply as a legal situation, and review legal points back and forth, but it really has to do with who we are as a town, and who we want to be. I feel there have been some inconsistencies with what I heard at the last session and what Attorney Fallon has said today. Last session, I think it was fairly clearly stated that we could not expect their help or cooperation with town lands, with remediation or any of the consequences of this new development. It seems that all of a sudden this time we're hearing about new sewers and $200,000 here and easements there. I think if you change your story that drastically, it's worrisome to me. I also wonder what good neighbors 185 Thorpe Street have really been to these great neighbors. I think, I'm not quite sure of the dates, but it seems as though since 2009 or so, 2010, the property has been in disrepair. I see what it looks like now. It's in the backyards of many of these abutting properties, abandoned buildings, broken windows. There's a playground right that also abuts. Children are just playing near what might be contaminated soil. This is not a good neighbor, in my opinion. I believe that they've had years to at least make it a little easier for the neighbors until all of this development, these development issues are settled. So I'm just wondering how trustworthy our applicants are. And now I'd like to introduce Darren Meany, he and his wife Elizabeth of the neighborhood.
People come up one at a time to speak. You're not
Okay.
introducing.
Okay,
Are you done with your comments?
I am finished, thank you.
Thank you. Come up, sir.
Good evening. I
Thank you for your time tonight. My name is Darren Meany. For the record, I live at 115 Bungalow Avenue. I'm here representing a group tonight, what we call the Granville Bungalow Neighborhood Association, which is represents the residents of Granville Street, Bungalow Avenue, Helen Street, and Francis Street, which is our little neighborhood community there. We are a neighborhood made up of 55 homes, that sit behind the businesses on the Post Road and are obviously adjacent to the 185 Thorpe Street property. Our little, we've been there since 2008, and we chose this neighborhood for a lot of the comments that were previously made about its quaintness. It's a modest neighborhood, which you find less and less of in the town of Fairfield. We chose Fairfield for its schools and its great downtown community, and we wanted to be as close to that as possible, and we were very fortunate to find a home in this neighborhood. Many of the houses are smaller and close to the road and don't have off-the-street parking. We don't have sidewalks all the way through the neighborhood. Again, this is an indication of this kind of closed little area. We have a lot of cars that are parked on the street, but as a result of this, but it's really not an issue because right now with the way that traffic flows, there's not a lot of traffic that comes through there, and our children know it. They are able to play in the streets. As an indication, you'll see my wife, who will be speaking later. We have basketball hoops, on the corners of the streets, and we have soccer nets where the kids are playing soccer, and we have over 25 children in our neighborhood. So it's a great mixture of old generation families that have been there. Some of our residents who you'll hear speak tonight have been in the neighborhood over 50 years. Some of them are multi-generational families that have lived there and now are raising their families there. And you have new families that are coming in with the expectation of raising their children there. Just growing in that, we chose this area for our ability to be able to walk to the town, for our children to be able to walk safely to the school bus, which they have to catch on the Post Road. Most of our children meet on the Post Road, so we're obviously extremely concerned about any kind of traffic change, and safety is the number one issue. I mean, why we're here tonight, and we have what we want to say. Any given night, you'll find all of our neighbors walking their dogs, playing with their kids, playing ball in the street. Things like that, and that's the beauty of where we are. We live very close together, and we have a tremendous amount of respect for each other. And I think you'll see as people come up here tonight and share their stories and their main concerns with you, how we are really a true little neighborhood, and we're very, very concerned about the development and its effect on that. As was mentioned, so in summary, we have 78 signatures that we recently got in a formal petition that we're opposing the zone change application. All three of the items on the docket tonight, which include the zone change to redevelop the area to an DRD development, the two amendments that allow for even greater use of a very small space with regards to the residential occupancy, and of course the special permit for the plan itself. We just don't think this is a good plan. There's really no other way to put it. Many of our residents in our neighborhood are going to get up and speak, but I just wanted to just quickly summarize our number one concern is safety for the kids, safety of the neighborhood, and traffic as it relates to proposed changes with regards to opening on Granville and making that even an emergency exit. And we're just concerned that, well, that may be a short-term option, what that could look like, down the road, and that becoming a throughway, which would completely change the dynamics of the neighborhood. We're concerned about parking issues and overflow of all of these units, 65 condo units that are fairly large units with multiple, they're not going to be retirees that are walking up four-story condos. They're going to be families with kids who are going to have cars, and there's not enough parking in there. They're going to end up on the street. They're going to end up in our neighborhood, and, that's a big concern. You've heard a lot of testimony tonight from experts about flooding. I can only speak, I think you'll hear some of our residents come up and talk to you about, we've had flooding issues in our neighborhood. There's after Sandy, there was water coming in, and, not on my piece of property, so I can't speak to that, but I think others will give you their opinion of what happened during the storm and at certain times of the year. One thing I'd like to, and I have a little bit of knowledge about this, so I'd like to speak to this. We are very concerned about the environmental impact of the development. You have clearly an older property there. I work in the construction industry, so I'm fairly versed in some of these topics. There's no doubt in my mind, and I have not seen the extent to which the applicant has put together environmental reports regarding the property or the buildings themselves, but I feel fairly confident based on my level of comfort with this area that you've got things like lead-based paint, asbestos, PCBs, all kinds of contaminants in that yard, and how that is handled during any kind of redevelopment as it could affect our neighborhood. And again, the more than 25 children that are within 500 yards of this property it's a huge concern of ours. It should be a huge concern of anybody in the neighborhood. And then, again, I know there's been some traffic studies done, and my wife will speak to this at a greater extent, so I don't want to trounce on her area here, but, if anybody's passed through Mill Plain and that intersection at 5 o'clock, I don't need to tell you that there's a traffic problem developing, and we try to get out of our own neighborhood, and it can take quite some time. And not to mention, people aren't always paying attention, or they're frustrated, and they're crossing the double yellow line to try to make that corner or try to make a light. And I personally have almost been hit numerous times, during those rush hour traffic periods of high traffic. So adding this level of new traffic to that area is a big concern. So, the other thing that we've talked about too is, in order to develop this many units and the way they're designed to be built, the pile driving, this is a community of homes. Some of these homes are over 100 years old. They have rubble foundations. What's going to happen? Has anyone done any evaluations about what the impact is going to be seismically of pile driving all of these units? And if there's any damage to any surrounding homes, who's going to be responsible for that, and how will that impact our homes? So that, in summary, talks about our little community association. We're strongly opposed, as again indicated by the petitions that were submitted to you, I believe yesterday, we do not approve any part of the proposed plan as it has been in the application to you. With that, I would, I guess, take questions before I move on.
We don't ask questions.
Okay,
to the public,
sorry.
no.
First time doing this, so...
Don't worry, the rest of the public, we're not going to question you.
Okay, so there we go. We set that. With that, I think, actually, I know we're not supposed to introduce anyone, but Jane Talamani would like to speak on behalf of Fair Plan, so...
Yeah, people can come up anywhere. It doesn't matter what you're first or last, you all get the same deference. Thank you, Mr. Meany. Not with the correct name, but pretty close.
I'll introduce myself. My name is Jane Talamini, Fairfield resident. I live at 1125 Oldfield Road, and I'm here representing Fairfielders protecting land and neighborhoods. I have a letter to read, which is dated April 1st, 2013. Now, please note, it was written before comments that you've heard this evening, if there's any irregularity.
I'm sorry, this was the letter I was supposed to make.
Dear Commissioners, this is a supplemental letter being submitted to replace our emailed letter on March 26, 2013, to accommodate new information presented at the March 26, 2013 public hearing. Fairfielders Protecting Land and Neighborhoods recommends that you deny these applications. The location does not support such a high-density development, which will add 65 more housing units on a 6.7-acre lot and hundreds of cars to an already congested and overburdened area of the downtown. As the TPZ may be aware, there is a proven net budgetary drain on the town's economic resources from residential development. While this is not specifically within your regulatory authority, town residents look to you to ensure that the health, safety, quality of life, environmental, and traffic concerns are protected to the degree possible. Here is a summary of these concerns as updated from testimony at the March 26, 2013 hearing. 1. Traffic. Ingress and egress to the site is notably limited, with a series of short, dead-end roads filled with parked cars, with a difficult and somewhat hazardous 5-way intersection at Mill Plain Road, which includes the entrance to the train station. 2. Safety. Adding hundreds of vehicles to the current road configuration will affect the ability of emergency vehicles to support the area, both in the proposed development and on the adjacent streets. Also, if and when the next major storm event occurs, resulting in evacuation from this proposed complex, how will the town address this situation with more than 130 additional cars on a dead-end street? 3. Property values. Adding a high-density development with the added issues of traffic, parking, access, and flooding will likely affect property values of nearby existing single-family homes. 4. Remediation. This land was historically filled in with contaminated fill, but the testing details, phasing, and sequencing of cleanup plans are not provided in adequate detail. 5. Flooding. This is a flood-prone area now, and without sufficient details on how the land is or will settle, this potential hazard has not been adequately dealt with. 6. Town-owned adjacent land. Although the lumber company filled in and paved over about 1 acre of town land in the adjacent marsh area, there does not appear to be any plan to remediate and restore it to produce ecological value. This negligence runs counter to the concept review prepared in 2009, which included a provision for, quote, a proposed wetlands restoration area. Aside from lack of information concerning contamination test results, there are 2 other issues here. A, the applicant testified that its tenant, an affiliated company to the applicant and a subsequent buyer of the tenant, used the town-owned land for its heavy equipment leasing operation during the years between purchase in 1994 and several years ago when it finally conducted a survey. This is a 13 to 14 year span of time when town land was used without permission or remuneration, and during which the applicant profited by the use of town land. The applicant should restore its original offering in the 2009 concept review to clean up town land that it used. B, the town land is behind the subject property, landlocked, and after the proposed development, the town will be unable to reach the property to conduct a cleanup on its own. This situation is analogous to the Exide cleanup. The Exide land development has been delayed until Mill River is cleaned because the land is needed as a staging for the river cleanup. Here, we need the Thorpe Street property to stage a cleanup of the town-owned land behind it. 6, grading and sinking. This land sits above contaminated fill, which itself is above a large vertical deposit of underlying peat and soft materials, and is unstable, and portions are sinking. Additional information is needed to evaluate fully the proposed solution, which is to dump additional fill on top of the unstable ground to stabilize it. The phasing and sequencing of any remediation plan is a concern of the town TPZ, even though permitting for such a plan is in state jurisdiction. We ask that this commission deny this application for incompleteness and because it fails to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the town and its residents. Should this commission decide at any point to approve any development of this land, we ask that any such approval be conditioned upon the comprehensive testing, remediation, and restoration of Fairfield's open space area adjacent to the site. I think there were 10 copies to hand out. Only 9 were handed out, and the person who did not get one may have this one, which has been...
I passed mine to the staff.
This has been marked up.
Sure, I mean, I can get another copy from staff if you want.
Wait, no, you can't, no, because we have to have the same copy. You have notes on this. We all need copies.
I just did some...
Yeah, you can take
We'll
one.
share, don't we? Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, I'll get it.
Just for the record, we can't have...
No new ideas.
Yeah, that's okay. Good point.
I wanted to ask you, I have some personal comments as a resident. Shall I come back later for that?
No.
You're not tired of my voice?
Not in the least.
Okay.
Not in the least.
I just want to say from my own personal experience, I go to I have a regular appointment at the medical multi-use building that uses the parking lot that goes out onto Thorpe Street. You have to go out onto Thorpe. That's not easy. Usually there's a car parked right to my left, and I have to nose out beyond that to see if anything's coming. That is not a good place, and I do not recommend at all increasing knowingly the number of cars that are going to be going in and out. I think that would be very, very unwise. I also have a great nervousness about building anything on the edge of water, be it right on the waves of Long Island Sound or the marshland. The only subdivision I can think of that works or has worked is the Meadows. I don't know how they fared during Hurricane Sandy. Many of my friends just left. But the Meadows is right on marsh, as you know. The developer originally wanted twice the number of units that are there. Is that a surprise? No. He was cut back. The Meadows seems to work. It is attractive. The units never hit the newspaper. It's word of mouth when they're available. It's become so popular. It's aesthetically appropriate, and it's practical because it seems to operate efficiently. Speaking of aesthetics, now if I heard right the last meeting, the new development, I think it was said it was a federal architectural pattern.
That's correct.
Would you tell me, please, how a federal architectural style fits on the edge of a marsh? I don't think so. Not at all. The Meadows, with its gray, clapboard, low buildings, seems to do it. Now, you're responsible for the picture of the town. You're responsible for the way the town looks. And I think you have a right to say that this kind of style, this architectural style, does not belong on the edge of a marsh. I also think that 65 units is outrageous, absolutely outrageous. You heard this gentleman talk about the neighborhood. You heard the RTM representative talk about the neighborhood. I mean, come on. In what way does this development fit in? Maybe we don't care. Well, I care. I care about the way things look, and I always have. Now, the flooding potential. Let's be real. We had Hurricane Sandy, devastating to people. Some lost their houses. Refrigerators and stoves were littered on Fairfield Beach Road, then swept out. I went down, one house had the front door facing the sky. I'm very sorry to say, being pessimistic, this will happen again. We've been warned and warned and warned. Did you look at the news tonight? Did you have time? Probably not. The Midwest, it's horrifying. The flooding was called unprecedented. That's not saying the first time in 10 years, the first time in 20 years. Unprecedented. Kayaking through Chicago streets. Kayaking through small towns. Now, are we so blessed that something like that could not happen here? I don't think so. I think we've got to start getting real. I don't think Fairfielders who lost their houses down at the beach should rebuild. Many are. That's okay. Probably not too smart. But it's not smart to put new buildings right on the water. Not in view of what the trends seem to be, not in view of what science is telling us about whatever you want to call it, climate warming, ocean warming, whatever. You have to take the long view. The trend is frightening. And if you put, not you, but if one puts 65 units on the border of a marsh and expects nothing to happen within 5, 10, 15 years, I think that is very, very naive and very, very unwise. I really think Fairfield has got to get smart and start taking sensible precautions, informed precautions. This development to me, whereas 10 years ago might not have seemed so very, very much of a folly, to me today is just not appropriate. And I want to, you know this, but to reassure myself, I will say, this is asking for a zone change. You don't have to award a zone change. And I thank you very much for all the stuff you have to listen to.
Thank you.
I agree.
Thank you. Next.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Jim DiStefano. I'm a professional engineer. My office is located at 50 Thorpe Street. I've owned the property on Thorpe Street since 1986. Seen a lot of changes in 27 years. Fairfield Lumber was there when I first moved in. I'd like to talk to you a little bit. Well, first of all, I'd like to just remind you, and you all know this, the application before you tonight is not an as-of-right development. To achieve this, they're asking not just for a zone change, but for numerous text amendments, and you have no legal or moral obligation to grant that. And I can only describe those text amendments and zone changes as a gift. A generous gift from you to the applicant that will have the effect of increasing the property values of this site probably 500%. A generous gift indeed. And I think it's important to keep that in perspective when we're just discussing things like obligations to clean up messes on the site. I'd like to talk to you about traffic on Thorpe Street. And traffic volumes are light, and that's very fortunate because Thorpe Street is a very treacherous road to navigate. And any of you that haven't driven down it, I would suggest that you just take a ride down that road before you vote on this application. Thorpe Street is a very narrow road, 30 feet curb to curb, with parking on both sides of the street, and that leaves a 12-foot wide travelway, which is not sufficient for two-way traffic to pass. If a car is coming the other way, somebody's got to pull over to let them pass. It is not a two-way road, even though it functions as one. And it wasn't always that way. And the event that really caused that to happen happened here about 10 years ago. There was an application that came before you about 10 years ago to build 6 condos on the east side of Thorpe Street. The applicant built a curb and sidewalk where cars used to park on the shoulder. And I recall very clearly appearing before this commission about 10 years ago on a night like this and suggesting that the curb line should be pushed back to allow for open traffic flow. The commission didn't heed that suggestion because by a rare coincidence, Attorney Fallon was representing that applicant as well. And he persuaded the commission that everything was fine. Everything was okay. And he's a very, you might know, he's a very persuasive guy. He always sounds so reasonable. And his message is always the same. Everything's fine, everything's okay, don't worry, be happy. And that's a very calming message. It's delusional, but it's calming. But the reality is, it wasn't okay. And it's still not okay, and we are still today on Thorpe Street living with the ramifications of that decision. And it's rendered Thorpe Street somewhat impassable as a two-way road, but it works only because the traffic volumes are so low. Mr. Galante, last hearing 3 weeks ago, suggested that in prior uses of the site, there were 90 trucks a day. I don't know where that came from. I've never seen anything like that volume when Fairfield Lumber was there or United Rental, unless he was counting some pickup trucks going to the lumber yard. You had some big trucks that would come in early in the day or early in the morning, going out for delivery, same thing with United Rental. But through most of the day, we did not see big trucks on Thorpe Street. The intersection with Mill Plain Road and the Post Road is a very interesting intersection. And it's a 5-way intersection, and I'm not going to mention the fact that it's dysfunctional on Mill Plain Road, because that's somewhat irrelevant. But trying to come out of Thorpe Street is quite an experience. You have to do some maneuvering to avoid getting broadsided, and the reason is because it's a 5-way intersection, something about that disorients drivers. And people coming out of Mill Plain Road, making a left-hand turn onto the Post Road, think they have right-of-way over somebody going straight from Thorpe Street onto Mill Plain. So as soon as that light changes, these poor people that have been waiting for several light cycles to get off of Mill Plain Road, dart across the road, and if you're going straight, you've got to really jockey to avoid getting hit. And it's a very dangerous intersection. The applicant has chosen to restrict all traffic to Thorpe Street, which is not a collector road or an artery, as your regulations require, or anything resembling a collector road. Town plan identifies it as a minor road. The reason they're not allowing or showing access from Granville and Bungalow was a strategy designed not for what's best for the application or for the development or for the town, but to limit the number of angry neighbors here tonight opposing the application. And the philosophy was concentrate all the traffic on Thorpe Street and screw those guys on Thorpe Street. They're just a bunch of business owners and renters and condo people. You know, they're not a neighborhood like the other town or the other area. And, but if you do choose to approve this application, I think it's bad planning to concentrate all the traffic on Thorpe Street. And if you feel strongly enough that this application should be approved and will not adversely impact the overall neighborhood, then you should spread the love around to all the roads and disperse traffic rather than concentrate it. At the hearing 3 weeks ago, I listened to Mike Galante talk about traffic coming out of Granville and Bungalow. So the next morning after the hearing, I figured, what the hell, let's check it out. So on my way to the road or to work, I pulled down Granville. I never went down there. It's a very lovely neighborhood. And I can understand why the people living there wouldn't want additional traffic any more than those of us on Thorpe Street want it. And I went around the block, came out Bungalow, looked both ways, made a left-hand turn across the Post Road. No problem. Now, this was about 8 o'clock in the morning. And now there are times when it does back up. But most of the day, it's not that tough to get out of there. I'm not saying we should be putting all these cars in the neighborhood, but if you do choose to approve an application that's presented, I think it's only reasonable to disperse the traffic rather than concentrate it on Thorpe Street, which really can handle it. Density, I think, is really the significant issue here. Personally, I'm not opposed to the concept of residential multifamily development on this site. It's the outrageous density that really is the problem. And that's the reason we need all these zoning text changes to accommodate it. Because we're cramming so much onto so little a site that they can't accomplish it and still meet all your standards for parking and access that are in the regulations for very good reasons. There is clearly not enough off-site or off-street parking being provided in the application. There are less than 20 parking spaces on the ground on the plan before you. And the applicant is counting the parking spaces as the apron of the driveways, and you know that doesn't work. And it doesn't work on Thorpe Street with the condos that are there now. That's why we have so much parking in the road. People don't park in their driveways. The site is subject to flooding on a very regular basis, coastal flooding. So there have been some misrepresentations made to you this evening. It's been mentioned more than once that, don't worry, DEP has looked at this. Well, you know what? DEP does not review applications for flood resistance. You do. The authority lies solely with the Planning and Zoning Commission. The requirements for flood-resistant construction appear in your regulations. They weren't part of DEP's tidal wetland review. They weren't part of inland wetlands review by the Wetlands Agency. That responsibility belongs here. The site is low. The base flood elevation on this site is elevation 11. The low point in the road is 5.8. That's over 5 feet of water on the road. You can't wade through that to get out. All the cars on this site will go underwater. The garages are at elevation 7.2, 7.5, and 8.0. The garages are 4 feet below the flood elevation. If people living here anticipate a storm and want to move their cars to high ground, where are they going to put those 130 cars? They're not going to park them on Thorpe Street. There's no place to go. There's no evacuation route for the residents who try and ride it out to get off this site. Because we're talking about deep floodwater depths. Everything on that lower level of the proposed houses goes underwater. The potential elevators that the applicant spoke about 3 weeks ago are all below the water table, below the flood level. All that stuff would get destroyed in a flood, and it floods on a regular basis here. The report that was done by Dr. Frank Bolin has been misinterpreted by the applicant. That was a report that was done to define the seasonal high tide line, which is the limit of DEP's jurisdiction. So that was a report not to conclude that the site doesn't flood. It was merely defining the line of jurisdiction for DEP. The site is subject to coastal flooding whenever we have a nor'easter or a hurricane like Sandy. And you know what? Yeah, you know, the next day at low tide, the waters do recede. You know, that's one of the nice things, or one of the interesting things about tidal flooding. But during the heat of the storm, this site goes underwater. When Fairfield Lumber was there, they were constantly having to remove their equipment and their lumber to high ground when coastal storms came through. I'd like to read from you a few excerpts from the town plan of development that the applicant neglected to mention. Starting with the 1979 Fairfield Master Plan, under the section on population density, the very first priority is a reduction of density along the shore. And that plan specifically maps this site as shore area. It further goes on to say, a few pages later, the shore area is a unique feature of Fairfield that requires a low intensity of development. Intense development cannot be encouraged in view of the potential threat of severe hurricane disaster, tidal flooding along the coastline. A few years later, the shore area plan reinforced those same objectives. Under the area of the shore area plan titled Coastal Hazard Areas, describing what's appropriate in a coastal hazard area, it says, activities which do not increase the flooding potential are suitable in these areas. These may include recreation, low-density, seasonal residential development, and conservation practices. Also in the shore area plan, page 79, it says, population goals recommend a reduction of density in the shore area in deference to the delicate ecological systems and limited public facilities. Then in the 2000 Town Plan of Conservation Development, it reinforces all of those prior planning objectives. And under residential goals, it says, one of the goals should be to disallow any further incursion of multifamily development in the shore area. Building high-density residential development in a flood-prone area is bad planning. The filling of the town land, I don't even know what to say about that topic. I sat here 4 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago in thorough amazement at what the applicant was saying, that they've enjoyed the use of this illegally filled tidal marsh for nearly 20 years, but feel no legal or moral obligation until this evening to participate in remediating the situation. And it's not just a matter of contaminants in the soil, it's just the fact that a tidal marsh is now a blacktop fenced-in area. And even in the proposal presented this evening by the applicant for a participation in the remediation, financial participation, we're still not talking about restoring it to a tidal marsh. He's talking about just something grass will grow on. I want to talk to you a little about the soil conditions on the site, something I know a bit about professionally. Tom Stanke, in his report and his comments this evening, talked about the issues associated with the unstable soils on the site. And he described in some detail for a layman what we engineers refer to as a global stability failure, which soils like this with a low shear strength are very susceptible to. And I got to say, I agree with almost everything Tom said about this issue. And to be honest with you, I don't often find myself saying those words. In my professional career, I sometimes find myself on the receiving end of Tom's comprehensive, maybe overzealous reports. But in this case, I think Tom's right on the money. That the soils, the unstable nature of these soils, you have 9 feet of peat and organic soils, highly compressible, very low shear strength, that will settle significantly. The applicant's expert has predicted a foot of settlement, long-term settlement, due to the fill they're placing on the site. And that's not confined to the area directly under where the fill is placed. That impacts the entire region. The secondary consolidations associated with that go on forever. They don't stop. They proposed mitigating that with some preloading the site with surcharging. We have found in our experience that's somewhat ineffective on these organic soils. We attempted that on the Southport Village site over on Rennell Drive. We had much thinner deposits of organic soils, and the results were somewhat disappointing. I would expect that any site structures that aren't on piles, that includes the new sewer line, the weir, the curbs, the drainage, the catch basins, that aren't supported on piles will experience subsidence and problems, and the bioswale. At the last hearing about 3 weeks ago, one of the commission members asked the applicant's expert about the potential for liquefaction during an earthquake. Good question, but it was the wrong question. And the applicant correctly responded that these soils, the peat, is not subject to liquefaction, and that is true. But if you had asked the question a little bit differently, you would have gotten a different answer. If you had asked, how will this site respond to an earthquake? Now that's an interesting discussion. Because these organic soils, though they don't liquefy, they're subject to seismic amplification. It's like putting a building on a bowl of Jell-O. When you get a little bit of shaking, everything amplifies. It was the kind of site that caused massive destruction in the marina area of San Francisco every time there's an earthquake. It's what the building code classifies as a Class F site for earthquakes, and Class F site is just what it sounds like. So the seismic performance of this site, not very encouraging, but it's not going to liquefy. The bioswale. Tom's points about the bioswale potential for turning into a mosquito breeding ground are very valid. The applicant has suggested that the condo association will be responsible for maintenance. And I've had enough professional experience with condo associations, and I don't know if any of you live in a condo or participate in a condo association, but I have found that condo associations do not like to spend money on maintenance issues that the residents don't particularly care about. And I would suggest that if this bioswale degrades with Phragmites, they are not going to go in there and do anything about it. And there's nothing you can do to force them or compel them to spend money on that, regardless of what representations are made by the applicant this evening. I would suggest, I would implore you to deny this application, to send the applicant a clear message this evening, to go home, clean up your messes, remediate the sins of the past on this site, and come back to us with a reasonable project, with a reasonable density, and disperse traffic, and then we'll talk. In conclusion, I'd just like to thank all of you. You've sat through almost 10 hours of testimony so far on this one application, and your patience is impressive. And I know you do this after a long day at work, many of you, and you do this week after week, month after month. And it's a somewhat thankless job and a necessary contribution to the community, and I'd just like to thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeStefano. Before I go to the next member of the public, Mr. Stanky, do you want to come up? Have you had a chance to read that now? That proposal from the applicant?
Yes, thank you.
Just for the record, just identify yourself.
Tom Stanky, Conservation Director, Town of Fairfield. I hadn't seen this, just thumbnail. There's conditions on it. I haven't seen the map that's referenced in it, the easement map. Something that I'd recommend that we review with the applicant, DEP, Engineering Department, Town Attorney, and the Conservation Commission. It's a beginning and bears looking into, but I couldn't give you endorse it or anything like that. It's new. It's not inherently objectionable.
Had you Had you given any thought to the level of remediation that you think is necessary on town land? Or is that just not something that you're familiar with?
I have not, with respect to, it depends on the approach to be taken. I mean, is it going to be,
Right.
what the standard is that you're going to achieve? Is it something here, I mean, it's mentioned capping, stabilizing capping, and have not gotten into any of this.
Right, and that was really my question was directed towards, is, the applicant put forth that their engineers looked at it and had recommended not to excavate all of the prior fill, but only to take the first foot and then replace that with soil and basically grow grass. And I didn't know if you had a view on whether that was appropriate. And I don't, if from a scientific or a conservation commission perspective, you just don't have enough information or haven't looked at that, then that's fine. But if you do have any perspective on what the appropriate level of remediation is for the town land, I'd be interested to hear it.
Well, just to, reading the third paragraph, the second sentence, you're removing all of the urban fill from the marsh while properly containing erosion and washout during excavation is not feasible, nor is it possible to stabilize the bank from which urban fill would be cut. That really tells you a lot about this project, and I don't doubt that the author is correct. These are things that they've looked at carefully, and you have to contend with it, and that means not, in their opinion, not restoring it,
right?
But to living with it, and in a corrected fashion.
And that was part of the reason why I wanted to ask you that question, because you had commented that in the swale, that excavating that area going down several feet was not a good idea because of the squishiness that would result, and whether that had any correlation. So in other words, why is it okay to excavate in the bioswale several feet, but not okay to excavate for remediation purposes on the town land?
You're asking me?
You may not be the right person.
I suggest I'm not.
Yeah. There you
I mean,
go.
you
So that's the question.
The
I don't know who to
butterfly
ask.
area, I think, over the sanitary line, there actually is select fill, the lightweight fill that their applicant is proposing to compensate to avoid displacement, and perhaps, I don't know, that may be the 1 foot of fill that they're talking about replacing, coming in with a light material, or to cap the town property after they strip the surface off.
Right. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Parker?
This on, okay. I had a question about the weirs. Were you suggesting that the size of the weirs are inadequate, and would they allow water to flow in both directions? Were you suggesting an enlargement of the weirs?
The weirs, well, the point on with respect to flow is they were designed so that they wouldn't work. They were designed to work, but they were located in an area where the weir, the invert of the weir is at this elevation, and the downstream surface of the land is higher, and that means it will not function, it will not work, and that needs attention in design.
Okay. And then the second point, since no one's been able to answer about my drainage pipes, may I ask Mr. Stenke if he knows what they do? Are you aware of the pipes that drain into the drainage ditch on the side of the property? Do you know in your review what those pipes are draining?
Yes.
What are they draining?
They are draining for the record, this is Pine Creek along the
This is
side.
on the,
This is on the east side of the property toward
by
St. Thomas.
St. Thomas, yes.
Between the lumber company fence
Right.
and St. Thomas.
Right.
Okay. And what you're seeing as when the property, lumber company was first filled, they had direct drainage coming right off the pavement into Pine Creek, into the marsh and then into Pine
Okay.
Creek. As it subsided, as the yard sunk into the mud, they had, it no longer had a positive flow out toward the, what happened is, instead of, this is pitching toward Pine Creek, all right? As it went down like this, and then it had a reverse pitch. And it started flooding more and more frequently, and the lower it got. So what they did is they came in and put these PVC, I think it's maybe about a dozen of them, run all the way along the east side,
Into the drainage.
down to the town property. And what they do is they drain the yard, because as the yard subsided, you had constant, as it got lower below grade and reversed gradient, the area between the fill and the creek, in my opinion, is part of this mudway that occurred. So as the yard is going down, it's squeezing the marsh surface up, and that impounds more water in the yard. So they eventually broke through onto St. Thomas property, and they added a series of pipes that was, these are, I think, are 6 to 8 inch diameter, all the way along the edge of the driveway to get through so the water would go through the fence and then out through these pipes into Pine Creek. So what they did is, in essence, it created a longitudinal island parallel to the large building, the access driveway in the yard and Pine Creek. And they had to overcome that to get the water out. It had to have these pipes
And they're
installed.
not functioning now?
No, it's dry now, but
It's dry.
it functions when it rains. And another thing is, as soon as the 4-foot capacity of the pipe exceeds the capacity of the debris and logs and things and sediment in the Pine Creek channel, so that the water comes out, hits this big sand delta in front of the pipe, and then just boils up on top of the marsh, and then it goes through the fence, makes a sluice way of the yard, and then comes back down in the marsh on the town property.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stanky. Just so I get an idea, how many more people are planning on speaking on this application? Okay. Come on up, next person. Someone? I'd like to hear that. Sure.
Thank you. They say a picture speaks 1,000 words, so I just have some pictures to show you who we are, the neighborhood around that this development is going to surround, and kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at. The pictures are kind of, they're the biggest my printer would print, so I'll bring it closer. And I'll leave this with you guys. My name's Elizabeth Meany. I live at 115 Bungalow Avenue. I'm a member of the Granville Bungalow Neighborhood Association, and I just want to present our neighborhood to you, just so you can see it. We're a century-old neighborhood with modest homes on modest lots, and we're what I think of as a front yard neighborhood. So our yards are small, and our activities always spill out into the front yards. We all know each other. We cook out in the front yard. We play in the front yard. Our activities often spill into the street. And you can see our streets are fairly narrow. There's a lot of on-street parking, and we, like our neighbors on Thorpe Street, our street is very narrow. It's not wide enough for two-way traffic to pass with the cars parked on either side of the street. The entrance to our neighborhood consists of small businesses. We have Granville Printing, the Roly Poly, Isabel St. Vincent Bakery, Fairfield Music, Wilson's Barbecue, Avelinos, and Karaku. Across the street from our neighborhood is the True Value Hardware, Raleigh's, the Dairy Queen, Mrs. Green's Grocery, the School of Rock, Subway, and the Shack, as well as a dry cleaner and a florist, and a couple of other small businesses. The first houses on our streets are multifamily homes, immediately followed by two-family and single-family homes. As you get further in, and we have affordable housing in our neighborhood. We have a lot of college students who live there. We have young families with small and young children. We also have some older families, and we have a nice number of senior citizens in our neighborhood who've lived their lives there and raised their children there and contribute to our community in a really meaningful way. We have people coming from all different socioeconomic levels. There are people who have inherited their homes, who've been there for generations. There are people who recently bought their homes in the big housing boom and paid more money for them. So we have a really, really nice mix of people, and it's a very, very cohesive group, and we all get along, pretty much. As you can see, these are some of the children on our street. They meet the bus on the street. The bus, when it comes around the corner at the end of Granville and at the end of Bungalow onto Francis Street, barely makes it. So if any cars are coming, they have to pull over or whatever, if there's room, because there's a lot of on-street parking. We also have, and I love this about our neighborhood, we have 4 basketball goals cemented in the ground facing the street in our neighborhood. That's how, and some of them are really old. You can see this one, and this photograph is very old. It's under repair, so it's missing the net right now, but it's going to get a new one. But people have for a long time used the streets in our neighborhood as part of their living space and continue today to use the streets in our neighborhood as part of their living space. And you can see kids of all ages playing basketball. We have some college students in one of these photos and some of the younger kids playing. And now I sort of want to talk about what it's the one thing that we don't like about our neighborhood, and that is getting in and out of the neighborhood onto the Post Road. I have some photos of traffic coming into the neighborhood. As you can see in this photograph, that's a car turning in to Bungalow, and we have a lot of on-street parking here for some of the businesses, and you can see that this car, there's no way another car could be turning out of the neighborhood or pulling, you know, around this car when it's coming in. And I also have a shot, let's see, some of these shots. Here's, I'll just get back a second, sorry. Here are 2 cars attempting to pull out of our neighborhood. I took this photograph at about 4:15 this afternoon, so it's not even during rush hour traffic. And you can see there are 2 cars trying to exit the neighborhood. There's one car trying to enter the neighborhood, and that car is stopped waiting for these 2 cars to pull out so it can go in. Another problem we have in that stretch of where the traffic gets backed up at that 5-way light, people get very frustrated. They wait through several light changes, and they invent their own lanes. So you have, it's supposed to be one single lane going straight, and then a small turn lane that allows about 3 cars in it, and then parking on the right. But if nobody is parked on the right, cars will pass on the right. And cars will actually pull across the double yellow line and pull into oncoming traffic to get into that left-hand turn lane to try and make that turn signal. And we end up with 5 lanes across sometimes right there at the edge of our neighborhood. And you know, the speaker earlier, our neighbor on Thorpe Street said, you know, the developer wanted to put everything coming off of Thorpe Street because he thought, you know, the people on Bungalow and Granville would think, well, it doesn't really affect us. It does affect us. If they put an exit on Granville, our streets can't support it. If they don't put an exit on Granville, Thorpe Street can't support it. And, I mean, it's a huge dilemma for this density of a development. Our streets just, the way they sit, cannot support this much development. And I actually have a picture, let me see if I can find it, of traffic coming out of Thorpe Street. And the traffic coming out of Thorpe Street now, I'm sure it's dangerous. I've only driven out of Thorpe Street a couple of times for odd reasons, because I don't live down that street. But I come down Mill Plain all the time. And you can sit in traffic on Mill Plain through 6 or 7 light changes sometimes, and there's nothing that can be done to the road right there without tearing down the train bridge. So it allows traffic in one direction and, you know, one lane of traffic in the other direction. And most of the cars coming down Mill Plain, approaching that intersection, are turning left, or, you know, some of them are turning right. And they have no expectation that people are going to be coming out of Thorpe Street. And when a car is coming out of Thorpe Street, it'll stop 2 or 3 cars that have to stop and wait for that one car coming out of Thorpe Street to pass. And that's 2 or 3 cars that don't make that light that are going to sit through another light change. So we, you know, on Granville and Bungalow, we are with you in solidarity. We think that that none of our streets can support this number of people coming in and out. And I have to say that, you know, when we moved into our neighborhood, Whether you've been here for generations or you just moved in, nobody in our neighborhood ever had the expectation that the charming character of our neighborhood would be overshadowed by tall, massive buildings so close to our homes and so much taller than the average homes in our neighborhood. Nobody in our neighborhood had the expectation that we would become a driveway for a large number of other people to get in and out of their homes. And nobody in our neighborhood had the expectation that we would have to live through years of pile driving, rattling our homes and possibly damaging them. And I want to say one more thing about the pedestrian situation. Our neighborhood is situated on the post road. We have a crosswalk at the 5-way intersection and no other crosswalk all the way until South Pine Creek. And our kids, our middle school kids and high school kids, most of them walk to school. And at the 5-way intersection, only 3 of the intersecting roads even have barred crosswalks across them. There's no walk sign. People turn right coming down Mill Plain. People turning left, turning onto Mill Plain, don't pay attention to pedestrians. People turning onto Thorpe Street don't pay attention to pedestrians sometimes. And it's not a safe intersection as it is. And across the street from us, we have the Dairy Queen, which we all love. We have Raleigh's, which we all love. We have Mrs. Green's, which we all need. And people trying to get from our side of the street to the other side of the street, it's a dangerous crossing to navigate. And I just can't imagine adding 130 plus more cars to that mix without some serious changes taking place to keep our kids safe when they're walking to school, to keep our commuters safe when they're trying to cross to get to the train station, to keep, you know, other customers of these businesses on the other side of the street who end up parking on our side of the street because we have more parking, to keep those people safe. And I just would implore you to seriously think about what high-density development does to small neighborhoods, to modest neighborhoods, and to small streets and residences. And I don't think that progress necessarily means putting up tall, federal, cookie-cutter condos packed in, a bunch of them packed into a tiny space that really can't support it. So I would ask that that you deny this petition and ask the developers to present us with something a little more reasonable and a little more in character with our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not leave these,
Are you submitting those, you're going to submit those drawings to the staff? Mrs. Maney, could you give the drawings to the staff when you're done? You can have them for the record, please. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Kyle O'Donnell. I live at 49 Thorpe Street. I'm right across the street from Mr. DeStefano's building. No denying, this is a beautiful proposal, and it really, they did a lot of work to make what seems like a nice area. Unfortunately, my issue is with the traffic, and I agree with the people who have spoken before about the traffic on the street. The traffic analysis that was done was very convincing with lots of great statistics, but the statistics were based on 65 empty nester units at the end of the street. And that would claim little to no morning traffic and little to no evening traffic because empty nesters wouldn't be going to work in the morning, wouldn't be going to work in the evening. Well, there's no way to guarantee that those units will be purchased by empty nesters. If not the first time, certainly not the second time or the third time. There's no way to guarantee that just graduated college students living 2 to 3 per unit, bringing their girlfriends or their boyfriends over, there's no way to guarantee they won't buy those units. In fact, if I was just graduating from college, I'd like to live close to town just right there, especially close to this great park that they're building. Especially if I was just graduating from college, I'd want to live close to town so I could walk downtown to the bars and the restaurants. There's no way to guarantee that families just starting out with 2 working parents, grandparents, childcare, you can't say that they're not going to buy those units, and especially not sometime in the future. Thus, the traffic impact could be much higher, will be much higher than the figures that were presented before. Very convincing, but I think they were incorrect. And it would even be terrible even if the units were all empty nesters anyway. The street is already crowded. You've heard many testimonies already. I'm not going to go into it too much. but the parking on the street is narrow, makes it narrow, and the restaurant and the bank at the top of the street, businesses that are currently very active and thriving, create a very narrow entryway. Just today, and actually I tried to take a picture today, but it wouldn't work. Just today I got in an accident, nearly got in an accident trying to turn off of Post Road, turning a right from Kirikou and between the bank down my street. There was a car at the light coming out of Thorpe Street, and a car parked on the street next to Kirikou. I had no place to go. And I drive around that corner slowly because I've encountered this before. I had to swerve and to nearly miss and squish between both the cars. And I do drive safely, and that has happened quite often. And I take that corner slowly, but not everybody will. As far as walking across the street, I live on Thorpe Street, and I drive to the rec center because crossing that street is too dangerous. I do drive a Prius. In addition, it seems that the traffic, it seems that the traffic that leaves Colonial Square office complex was not taken into complete consideration when the traffic presentation was made earlier. As church lets out on a Friday evening, a Saturday evening especially, as driving school parents pick up their students, as businesses and doctors' offices close for the day, we already have a traffic jam on our street. That's right, a traffic jam on a tiny, tiny little street like ours. I continually have to pull over to let oncoming traffic pass by, and I don't drive a Suburban. I drive a Prius. Additional traffic should be expected from people not living on the street to use the new parkland they are proposing at the end of the street. This includes runners, walkers, etc. People who want to come down and use that land would drive down the street and park. Where? Connection to other streets is a moot point. I actually agreed with almost everything Mr. DeStefano said, except opening up the other two neighborhoods would be pointless. That would just cause more traffic to come down Thorpe Street. Anybody who lived in the new 65 units would use the Thorpe Street light. And if I lived on Granville, I'd come around back and use the Thorpe Street light because I wouldn't be able to get out if I lived and cross Post Road to make that left turn. So you are looking at all of the traffic from Granville, from Bungalow, from the 65 units, all using Thorpe Street to get out because it's the only light. Could you put another light in? Well, now we're looking at more and more issues further down the line. If we are right, there is no place to put the cars and no way to fix the problem. We can't pave the wetlands. We can't build roads out. We can't move traffic to Granville and Bungalow. Once units are approved and built, there's no way to go back and undo it. Can't take property away once it has been sold to owners. And I'm a perfect example. I'm in the 6 units that Mr. DeStefano disagreed with across the street. But now I'm an owner, and now I'm a taxpayer in town. Imagine 65 more of me once this really is a problem. We will all be stuck regretting your approval if you choose to approve. All of us, and you. I understand there is no great way to resolve this property. The owner has a right to do something with it, and it could easily be turned back into a warehouse space without any approval from you. And we don't want that either. The owner is trying to maximize return on investment, but 65 units is way too many people, way too much density, and too many cars for tiny little Thorpe Street. It was never built for that. It was never designed for that. It's not a major artery. And no traffic assessment can see into the future the way those of us who've sat through 4 of these meetings are passionate about. In light of safety, public interest, preventing increased and permanent traffic snarls in downtown Fairfield, I ask that you deny this proposal. Please, don't open this Pandora's box. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Diana O'Malley, residence is 98 Granville Street, also a member of the Granville Bungalow Association. I'll be as brief as I can as well. I know everybody else wants to speak. Just thinking about what we spoke about tonight and working my way backwards, it was mentioned by our RTM representative, the proposal of Attorney Fallon and the application tonight for the sewers and open space property are wonderful concessions of that application. In law, we call that strategy, bringing up the best point to have someone pass something at the end so that it can't be known earlier. our representative was kind enough in saying that that was suspect, and I would have to echo her sentiment there, that bringing up those concessions at this point is at the very least suspect on the applicant's part. Attorney Fallon also mentioned that the concern about changing the amendments to the law that industrial space that's changed to this design commercial was approved in Bridgeport. We don't live in Bridgeport, so that's wonderful for them, but that's not something that we want to live in. We bought a house in Fairfield because we want to live in Fairfield and don't want it to echo the same type of city mentality as there. Obviously, we wouldn't want to have something change town-wide that's very specific to each neighborhood. Our town is a town of neighborhoods, and we're fortunate that it is. So we would never want to pass an amendment that would be so blanketed for all of our different neighborhoods, as diverse as they are. Also, the flooding has been mentioned a little bit. I know that we spoke in our neighborhood meeting about the fact that the flooding management system hasn't been thoroughly tested yet for this site, and obviously that's a concern. Those of us that were fortunate enough to not have flooding during a hurricane missed it by the skin of our teeth. I know that when my husband and I bought our house just this past October, it was contended with our mortgage company whether or not we were in the flood zone. That actually had to have two separate men come out and see if our house at 98 Granville Street was in the flood zone, because it was so hotly contested. So obviously, being right on the border is something that we don't want to mess with at all. That's been very well pointed out, as has traffic, as has concerns about traffic and children and the ordinance change. I just wanted to bring out one more thought about the pile drilling. I know we spoke about this project taking 3 years of construction. With all that pile drilling, I'm self-employed, so I'm home 50% of the time. I mean, I know that if you have a 9 to 5, you think you're going to be gone most of the time that construction is gone, but you know, our children are home from school at 3 o'clock, they're dealing with all this noise. I'm home 50% of the time trying to work, and that pile driving is the last thing that you want to hear constantly all day, not to mention the fact that having just bought a house, we were concerned about the foundation, and the last thing that we want is more stress on a foundation from our house built in 1947, which is probably coming to a lifespan anyway. So at the very least, if any of these ordinances for pile driving are passed, we would move the committee to consider some sort of a inspection of the foundations of the homes first, before the project begins, and then after the project ends, to see if there is any kind of implication for the foundations of the houses being as old as they are as they stand. So I don't think that it's contested with any of the neighborhood that we want something to be done with this property. Right now, it doesn't look good. We were concerned when we bought our home last year that it is an eyesore the way it is. But this particular development with this particular density is not right for the neighborhood. It's clear that the neighborhood association doesn't want it there, that none of us feel that any of its, you know, whatever they might be termed as good points outweigh the bad points, and that as it is presented now and applied for now, we very much feel strongly that it should be denied, not just for the density of the neighborhood or for the amendment changes, but just that it is not right for the neighborhood as it is applied for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joe Papp. I live at 148 Granville, and I'll keep this very brief. My favorite time of the day is at right around 3:50, 4 o'clock, and that's when my daughter, Claire, and my son get home from school, and they play in the street all night. In the summer, till 8, 9 o'clock, and as parents, we don't have to care. We're not worried. We always care. We're not worried. It reminds me of a neighborhood that I grew up in when I was a kid. It's a throwback neighborhood, something you don't see anymore. And we do flood. I flooded once. My neighbor Mark has been in my basement when I flooded. That was fresh water. There was a point about mosquitoes, and in our neighborhood during the summertime, you literally cannot sit in your backyard if it's not a screened-in porch because of the amount of mosquitoes. The neighbors will attest to that. It's the thought of it getting worse, I couldn't even imagine.
And the traffic issues, you've all driven down the post road, you've seen the traffic issues. It goes well past Mobile. And because it's a one lane, people are always trying to pass you on the right, and there's always accidents in that area. But beyond that, I think that just looking at the little things, thinking about the kids, being able to play, if there's an entranceway in Granville, even if it's deemed an emergency entrance, you know, that makes me very nervous. And I think it's really important that this great town continues the tradition of having these neighborhoods. And it means the world to us and to my children. And thank you for your time.
How you doing? I'll be real brief too. My name is Mark Sanita. I'm actually live at 168 Granville. I'm also part of the Bungalow Granville Association, but I live in the house right in front of the proposed entrance where they want in Granville. And Joe's my neighbor, and he can attest that our neighborhood is basically, it's like a front yard neighborhood. Kids are out in the streets all the time, playing basketball. There's hoops all over the place. Everybody knows my corner because there's 15 basketballs at all times just laying in the road. Only one of them is mine. And the thing is, the kids feel safe. They leave their basketballs, they leave footballs. Everything's in front of my yard. But you know what? It's the whole thing about the yard and where they want to propose the entrance. I brought along some pictures, and this is on a Sunday. I don't get the mic, but this is... Unless you're going to give us your iPad, you can't share pictures. That way they can be part of the record. Oh, they do? You want me to email them to you?
Well, your alternative is you can email them to staff now. They'll give you the email address that you can share with us and then they can put them as part of the record.
Okay, I could do that. I'll do that.
Because, should there be an appeal, we can't have evidence that it's not tangible.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll email them over, but the whole thing about it is it's in front of our house. Basically, there's kids all day, all night, and it's not just Granville Bungalow, it's also Beaumont next door. As you know, the streets are the way they're connected. Ours is a horseshoe, and the only way for Beaumont, or whatever it's called, to them to get to our house is basically they got to go all the way up to the post road. Well, they're all in the same bus, and how do you think they try to get over? They hop the fence, and it actually opened up a gate. So now you got 24 kids on the Bungalow Granville side, but add another 10, 15 kids that come over and play with each other. That's the whole thing about this. I'm more concerned about the safety issue here. There is an eyesore over there at the factory. It's a big eyesore. We want something done with it. There's also a safety issue since 2009. There's nothing been done there. The fence is falling. Anybody can get over to that factory. I mean, there's graffiti on it. There's kids there all night. I mean, they proposed a nice proposal and everything like that, but they've let that factory go. I mean, what about the neighborhood that's around it? I mean, that tells you something, that they're not really, you know, it's just falling apart and they haven't done anything. There's holes in the fences all over the place, but that's what I wanted to say. I think you should deny this. The density's too high, the traffic, the safety, all that. I mean, it's really going to take away from our neighborhood. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Addie Meany, and I live at 115 Bungalow Avenue. I'm 13 years old, and I moved into my house in 4th grade, and next year I will be a freshman in high school. I've loved growing up here, and I'm hoping that all the other children in this neighborhood have loved it as much as I have. When I was in elementary school, I would wake up early in the morning and walk to the end of the street to catch the bus. When I got off the bus in the afternoon, my babysitter, who lived on the street opposite mine, would come to watch me until my parents got home from work. In the evening, I would ride my bike around the neighborhood with my best friend who lived across the street, or toss the lacrosse ball outside with my dad, or when I was told to, walk the dog. When I started at Roger Ludlow, I had to walk to and from school every morning and afternoon. It wasn't too bad because we lived so close to the school, but it was always a danger for me to cross at the end of the street. It has always been hard to cross there with all of the cars and traffic that go through every day, especially right when school is starting and everyone is driving their child to school or they're driving to work. After school on Fridays, I would walk downtown from school with my friends and then walk home afterward. During the summer, we would ride our bikes to the beach or walk to get aerobics, and at night, my family and I would walk to Wilson's for dinner and then walk to Dairy Queen for dessert. If you can't already tell, I am constantly walking along and near the street to get where I need to be. I can't exactly drive yet, so walking is my method of transportation. These are things I still enjoy doing and hopefully have the privilege of doing throughout my high school years, although it seems like the construction that's planned may make these things impossible. Opening our street means many more cars coming through, which makes it even more dangerous for me to walk to school or cross at the end of the street to get downtown. And for the younger kids, it makes it dangerous for them to ride their bikes or play basketball in the street or even toss the lacrosse ball with their dads. The children in this neighborhood are all different ages, and I'm happily right in the middle. There are some who have grown up and are heading off to college. Some of us are in high school or just ending middle school. For us, I'm not as concerned because we have already had the pleasure of growing up freely without having to worry as much about the danger of traffic. What I'm worried about is how the construction is going to affect the younger kids in this neighborhood. I know they love being able to play with their friends in the street and ride their bikes and scooters around the block. I once loved the same activities they do now. There are some children who aren't even there yet and have just begun growing. Let them be able to ride their bikes one day and walk downtown with their friends. This neighborhood is a great place to live, and adding more traffic will just make it a more dangerous setting. Let's keep it just as great and safe as it already is now.
Thank you.
My name is Jim Pendry. I own the building at 60 Thorpe Street, and I just want to kind of reiterate everything that everybody said, how you can't have two cars passing on Thorpe Street anymore. You can't get out of the 5 road intersection without taking your life in your hands as you're trying to go straight and people turning left into you as they want to go downtown. And I think residential is the appropriate use. I just think the density is way too big for the traffic possibilities. You know, and I don't know how you solve the problem other than density.
Thank you.
Reduction of density.
I'm Donna Walsh. I live on Francis Street, and I don't know that you've heard from anybody who lives on Francis Street. I am directly in front of the eyesore. The garages are in my backyard. When I bought my house almost 6 years ago, I bought it knowing that work would be done, that was a plan, that there were plans to change that. I embrace that. I am happy that there is a plan to change it. I do want it responsibly done. What I noticed, though, in the last couple of years is that the property has fallen into disrepair. That's my backyard. When I look out my kitchen window, I see an eyesore. I have a sweet yard. I have it all fenced in. I have it landscaped. It's still an eyesore because I have ugly garages in my backyard. They've fallen into disrepair. There is graffiti there now, and in the last week it's been painted over, but graffiti has been there for a long time with obscenities really spray painted there. So my point basically is I do want development there. I want responsible development there. Until that happens, I would like the property to be secure. It is not now. There's a fence that opens up into my driveway where people, you know, sometimes kids or older kids, not little ones, travel in and out of the parking lot and onto my driveway. There's a tree that's growing underneath the fence that's pulling up my driveway. That's just due to the property not being cared for properly. And the garages are falling down. So I do have a unique perspective. When I look out my kitchen window, I see hideous, ugly garages. And it is a sweet neighborhood. It's a nice neighborhood. I want it to remain a nice neighborhood. I do want that property developed, and I want it developed responsibly with the best interest of the neighborhood in mind, and keeping in mind that some of us are looking out our window at ugly garages every single day. And I would like that. I would like to make the point that I would like the property to be secure, which it is not now, and to be cleaned up. And if this doesn't pass for a long time, which it seems like it may take time, which is fine if it's going to take time for it to be done well, the property needs to be cleaned up. It's like a blighted property now, and I know some of you probably walked it in the last couple of weeks, and I'm suspecting that may be why some of the graffiti was painted over. But some of that does need to be taken care of. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Janice Pomazzi, and I own 124 Thorpe Street, and I abut the Osprey Landing proposal. And I am an empty nester, and there's a couple of things I don't like, like paying extra money common charges, flood insurance. I don't know who's going to be paying for the sewer attachment. Hate stairs. And I know that they've been talking about the condos having 1 or 2 bedrooms, but I read the specs and they all have 3 bedrooms. You know, I don't know. And the garages, the garages are 2-car garages. They're tandems, okay? And they have openings in the garage for the floodwaters. I don't know about the cars. They're going to get flooded. I'm also very concerned in the emergency entrance. I've never heard of emergency entrance that's locked. And it's also locked with a lockbox. So you have to get out of your car or out of the truck and open it up, push in some numbers, get the key out, and then open it up. I've never heard of such a thing. Plus, what about the snow that's going to get piled up in front of it? Maybe a car's in there. House could be on fire. A fire goes very quickly. Also, the sidewalks. They're talking about sidewalks. There is some sidewalks, but halfway down in front of my house, and as you go up further, there's no sidewalks. I do have a sidewalk in front of my house, but there's no sidewalks on the other side. So I don't know if they're going to be putting in, the town's going to be putting in more. I don't know. Also, on the regulations section of 10.7.2, the requirements for the major or collector road status shall not apply if the underlying zoning is designed industrial. I think, I'm not too sure, but I think that should be changed to residential. And then we can take the traffic study on that situation where it's residential. And I also would like to see, I also went and checked the traffic also on that light, and the light turns red for 1 minute, and the light turns green for, the light turns red for a half a minute, and it turns green for 1 minute. So if you're going to have, I don't know, 252 parking places, I don't know, 160 cars, everyone is saying, that's going to be quite a backup. There's also a crosswalk there too. So there's people, they have the right of way. So there's going to be a real good backup. Now, I don't know about opening streets up, but I think it would be a really good idea if we picked some of these streets to open up. There's Bungalow, there's Granville, there's Beaumont, there's Rugley, there's Francis Street. There's 5 roads there. I mean, if this is, you're thinking of passing this, you got to open some more roads. They got to be opened. It's going to be too hard for Thorpe Street to handle all this. Also, I'm worried, if it does pass, I'm worried about the screening. Are they going to put screening up for me? I mean, there's going to be dust, dirt, fumes, noise. There's going to be a lot of noise. I'm talking from the bottom of my heart. There's going to be too much traffic. And this is going to lower the value of my house. This is my retirement. I bought it for my retirement. I have my daughters living there. I have my future son-in-law living there. I mean, I think 65 condos is too much. And if you do think about passing this, if you could lower it to 25, or maybe we can talk about another alternative for this property. And the water ponds now right in front of my house. It ponds. And what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. I'm right there. I abut it. I thank you.
My name is Steve Pomazzi, Genesis, my wife. They both own the home jointly. and I have some concerns. A lot of the concerns were talked about already. I think that the proposal for 65 condos is too many for the situation of the cars. My first priority is, how about the children that will come out of this development? Thorpe Street is a dead-end street. There's no room to turn around. The people turn around in my driveway because we're the last driveway on Thorpe Street. The people come into my driveway and turn around. There's been accidents. There's no legal, beautiful turnaround that could be accessed properly. The town of Fairfield comes down and plows all the snow into my driveway at the very end. There's no place else to put it. I would suggest that the town-owned property that's in the back of this development, if it's okay with the builders, to deed that into the section where Thorpe Street comes in to make a proper turnaround so a school bus can access the bottom and pick up all of those children that will be living in there. There's a very, very big safety issue with the kids walking up the end of Thorpe Street to get onto the bus because the bus doesn't come down Thorpe Street. That's the priority, is that safety issue for the children. Something's got to be done around that turnaround because it's a dead end and there's no place to turn around unless they want to turn in my driveway and I want to start charging tolls. Or they turn on the other side into the auto body repair. That's a very large safety issue. That should be looked at very closely because there's going to be a lot of kids in there. Another thing, I don't think our neighbors are that nice. For 20 years, they've had 20% of my driveway, and they knew it, and they had their fence across it. I finally had my land surveyed and found out this, and I took the fence out. But for 20 years, I was denied 20% of my driveway, and I never knew it until I had it surveyed. When I seen them surveying it, I had my property surveyed, and that's what I found out. I also took advantage of the offer to go take a ride through the property and look at the buildings and everything. When I went into the back of the property, I was dismayed. On the far right-hand corner is brush and trees that were cut within a year piled on the town property on the right-hand side. In the center is pressure treated with old creosote wooden beams that large machines are made to run on, if you walked on that property, that have been dumped on there and never removed. You could see places where machines have lifted debris and dumped it over the fence and deaded into the fence within the last year. Construction debris, concrete, bricks, steel, sheet metal, glass. I don't think our neighbors are that good. They might mean well, but I have not seen that, especially with my walkthrough. Please do not let them put 65 units in. Too many. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's late, I hope you'll indulge me. I'm not as entertaining as some of the other speakers. I'm Jan Reber from 85 Belmont Street. I oppose the three applications of this applicant. This issue really seems to me to largely turn on the text amendments, which I think are absolutely outrageous. The applicant is telling you that every industrial property in Fairfield that wants to become design residential is going to get a pass from you if his first text amendment passes. Has anyone even studied what those 10 or more industrial properties, where they're located, what the implications of that would be? I think that's really a place you need to start. I think you ought to have your staff look at the text amendment and its implications for the 10 or more industrial properties in Fairfield. The applicant's attorney saved that issue for last because it's really his weak point. He also wants more density. I think you've heard from almost every speaker here that density does not work. It violates the town plan. There's no issue here of whether this is progress for the future. Density is density. It won't work in this neighborhood. I think if you look at the plan, you're going to see that Thorpe Street is really a very narrow causeway that connects an island of 6 acres to the rest of Fairfield. That causeway is not going to support the property as the developer wants to do it. The traffic report compared the traffic of the proposed development to Stonebridge, but Stonebridge is not fully occupied, or at least it wasn't in 2011 when the traffic study was done. And many residents of Stonebridge walked to the train. That's why they bought condos there. So to compare the traffic flow of Stonebridge to 65 units here is completely wrong. I think that you've spent a lot of time, I know you have meetings where you're working on the town plan. I don't think you should allow the town plan to be blown up by this developer by changing two text amendments that have broad implications for Fairfield. I'd like to just talk for a minute about the contamination of the project. There's a town engineer report from March 2012 that says that the town property has soil that's predicted to settle, and that it's contaminated with polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons and extractable total petroleum hydrocarbons above action level. That pollution happened to the town property on the watch of this property owner. When United Rentals rented the property, they used it in 2011 and 2001 as a staging area for their response to the World Trade Center disaster. Hundreds of pieces of equipment were trucked in and out of the World Trade Center to that property. They were not washed before they came back from the World Trade Center. So there's some residual pollution at that site from the World Trade Center. Building number 3, if you look at building number 3 that's being proposed, that's the building closest to Beaumont Street. It's closer to Beaumont Street than any of the other buildings or closer to any other homes. You find that building number 3 looms over the homes at the end of Beaumont Street. It takes away their light, it takes away their view, and it places decks with lights right over those homes. I don't think that's fair to do. So building number 3, I think, in particular, is really a problem. Some of the other proposed buildings are proposed to be built right along the town line, the line of the town 1 acre property. Unless that property is cleaned up, and I don't think the proposal currently is enough to clean it up, you're going to have people living in direct proximity to contaminated town property. I really wonder about your liability in approving something like that. You know the property is contaminated, but you're going to allow somebody to live in immediate proximity to that. Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. I think it's really time for this developer to go back, reconsider, and provide you with a much more limited project, and one that does not require the text changes that have town-wide implications. Thank you.
Are there any further members of the public who wish to speak? Other than Mr. Fellner, are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? How many more folks? All right, everyone hold off for a second. Let me just, let me take a 1 minute recess. You can stay there, just, you can start talking, we'll listen. I'll listen, go ahead, go, talk. Go ahead.
Okay, that's fine. I just, I agree with everything everybody else here said. I keep it real brief. The fact of the matter is, I've lived in the house that I'm living in now on 32 Holland Street for the last 57 years. The neighborhood hasn't really changed any, except for the amount of kids coming in and out, and we've got a lot of kids there. I learned how to ride my bike in that neighborhood, tell my kids how to ride their bikes in the neighborhood. I'm watching the little kids that come up now, they're learning how to ride their bikes in the neighborhood. It's not a safe place to be with any more traffic that's in there already. My job allows me to go back and forth to my house numerous times a day, which I have to go back to my house, is there. The traffic on the post road is horrendous. Trying to get in and out of there on Granville Street or Bungalow Avenue is just, it's a nightmare. They've got signs up that don't block the intersection, it's always blocked. We've had a number of times, almost gotten hit. The kids, I've tried to teach my kids how to drive, trying to get in and out of there. Came real close, a lot of times they have accidents in there. During the afternoon, the morning, in the evening, it's pretty much always a problem, especially with the five-way intersection there. Just tonight, we watched people trying to pull out a roly-poly and backed over the flowers that were on the other side of the street in front of sort of Speedy there. And the woman's like, just, I can't believe the traffic is so bad here. The cars parked all over the place. I can't drive. I'm like, all right, well, lady, you got to do the best you can do. My worry too is the people that are in the neighborhood that are already getting water in their basements. Okay, a lot of them do that. Our house has gotten water in it numerous times in the past 57 years. My feeling is that if you put in that many condos down there, I can't even imagine 65 condos down there. I mean, like I said, I've lived in that neighborhood for 57 years. Can't imagine that many houses down there, or apartments down there. Putting that many down there is going to change the water table. Okay. With the swamp being right back in the backyard, that water is going to come up, and those people that don't have water or haven't gotten water in years, they are going to get it. They are going to get it. Like I said, most of the time my basement's dry. I'm pretty good, but we have gotten water, and we've noticed when before they fixed the drainage or tried to fix the drainage, there were more times we would get water than not. They put where the Pine Creek Deli is, that big building back there. You've got all these buildings going up. There's more, it's more concentrated back on the post road than what it ever was. I don't know how many people know, years ago, when I was a kid, we used to play in the swamp, and our parents would tell us, you go down there, we're going to kill you. Nothing good can happen down there. You're going to get sick. My brother contracted impetigo. He's been, going down the swamp, wet feet, come home. My mother's like, oh my God, this is, it's ridiculous. So, I mean, that was just a few of the things that happened. One of the reasons that I'm worried also about the land down there is the contamination. Years ago, there used to be, and for years, there was an asbestos glove factory that sat where Trainer Motors is now. And that was one of the reasons why my parents didn't want us down there. The chemicals they were using to clean the gloves with and recondition the gloves with were being pumped out into a ditch that was out there. It's kind of hard to tell you now, I mean, to picture this, but on the side where the building sat, there was actually a ditch that probably went from, well, maybe B to Brian LeClaire. It was that wide. It was almost like a circular trench that was in there. And then we got into a stream which should eventually flow all the way out to Long Island Sound. All that water, the stuff they were using to clean the gloves with, was being pumped directly out of and you could see it. They had pipes, was going right into that water and right out into the Sound. There's a lot of polluted stuff in there. At one point, I remember Sue Kelly was here. She left. She had to take her daughter home. But her brother and I were down there, and we had waders on, and actually got stuck walking through the trench, through the little stream there. It's all soft, and we stood there for so long that the water started to come over the boots, and we almost didn't get out. They had to use branches to pull us out of there. But underneath there, it's all soft silt, and that's just built up over the years, and that thing being there just didn't help matters any. It's more like quick mud. It's very, very nasty. So those are my concerns as far as the contamination, and that water that would run all the way around where the lumber company was. So whatever's underneath that lumber company pavement, okay, that spongibility we was talking about before, all that contaminant that was in there is run into that dirt, and then you take that stuff off the top, and if it comes up, like Mr. Stanky said, if it rises up, it's going to start sucking stuff up for the bottom. I mean, that's the way I can see it, what happened down there. As a matter of fact, one time when I was in high school, I had an environmental studies class, and they had us do final exams. We just go out and do, water tests or whatever you wanted to do for your final exam. I took water test kits and went down the river down there, and with cameras and everything else, took pictures, gave them the results of the test, which were way off the charts, you couldn't even do them. Had pictures of, all the way down to the dump, where we saw guys coming with the town trucks and dumping stuff over the side of the bank into, and I think I said, this is years and years and years ago. Dumping stuff over the side of the bank was running out into the creeks. So as far as contaminant, there's a lot of stuff down there that, you know, you start digging down, like Mr. Sankey said, you know, you dig a foot, you dig 2 feet, you dig 3 feet, the more you dig, the more you're going to get out of there. So, you know, we do have a problem, and it'll be a problem for the town. So I would really appreciate if you'd really reconsider this and not put 65 units down there again. I can't even imagine 65 units being on that little piece of property down there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Feldman. At this time now, we're against a curfew. We have an 11 o'clock curfew for our meetings. We don't go beyond. Just to let the public know and the commission know what we're doing on rescheduling this or continuing this matter. And Mr. Fallon, you're going to have to come to the mic, because I have to put something on the record with you as well. We will be back Tuesday. Our meetings for the month of May are the 14th and the 28th. However, we're backing up too much business now. We have a number of other applications that are backing up. We're going to have, I'm going to call a meeting on the 7th. We'll continue this matter on the 7th to conclude public hearing. I know Mr. Fallon's available that date.
I am.
So we can finish the public comment and then have the applicant's final comment and close the hearing. However, that's beyond the 35 days, so we need your consent.
Applicant hereby consents to an extension as provided for in the statute so as to allow the continuance of this hearing to May 7th.
Thank you, Mr. Fallon. And with that said, the public will be here 7:30. This will be the first 7:30. The 7th at 7:30. You don't want 7. You want 7:30.
7:30. Yeah.
7:30. Right. The 7th at 7:30. May 7th, Tuesday, 7:30. You may want to check the. Well, I was going to get to that. You have to check the newspapers or the website. We have to make sure we can get this building on the 7th. If it's not here, it'll be posted. You can always call the office up, the staff up, and they will tell you the location where it is. But it'll be specially posted 7:30 on the 7th here, unless we post a different location. That being said, the meeting will stand in adjournment.